Yo! Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're taking the time to have an extensive look at one of ThatGuyWithTheGlasses.com or Channel Awesome's most popular and infamous creators. A look so extensive, in fact, that you might call it a retrospective inside a retrospective. One of a man who has made an insurmountable amount of content over the years. A guy who has written several books, a webcomic or two, internet movies, an ARG series, and has a legacy that extends far beyond himself and into the general culture of the internet at this point. Yes, indeed, we will be taking a look at the one and only Linkara. So, sit back, relax, and get ready for quite the ride into the world of Atop the Fourth Wall and far, far beyond it. Louis Jeffrey Lovehog, born August 19th of 1987, better known by his online handle, Linkara, is an American YouTuber, internet reviewer, and a writer based in Minnesota who hosts a comic book review show called Atop the Fourth Wall. Now, this comic book review show is what Linkara is most well known for, alongside the likes of his Power Rangers Retrospective, playing his character in several collabs and ThatGuyWithTheGlasses.com films and the like, and for a bit of controversy that we'll be getting into a bit later. However, unlike others in this retrospective, there is far more that can be said about Louis and his creative ventures before he ever was even close to joining ThatGuyWithTheGlasses.com, or hell, even making videos or online content at all. See, before any of that, Louis had actually written and self-published a couple of books, 4 to be exact, all part of the same series that he titled Angel Armor. The saga was written between the ages of 14 to 19 by Louis. That is to say that he wrote the first book when he was only 14, and the last one by the time he was 19. While sometimes discussed in very, very basic terms, these novels are almost never talked about in any sort of real detail when examining the history of Louis and his, well, creative ventures. In fact, in my research, I found that there was really only a couple of videos in existence out there that even brought the topic of these novels up. And there's one fellow that happened to review the first book years and years ago, and that's about it. And because I'm a crazy person with way too much time on his hands, who feels the need to make my videos as comprehensive as possible, etc., etc., I decided it was time these books get the time and the light that they also deserve. And so for this retrospective, I read all 4 of Louis's books, so that you don't have to. So what sort of content did they contain? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they cringe? Are they weird? And better yet, do they reflect the mind of the online content creator that would come to be? Well, let's get into that. And by get into that, I mean, let's spend the next several hours talking about exclusively just them. Get comfy, fellas. we've got some reading to do. Starting with, of course, his first novel. Published, according to Amazon, on July 14th of 2003, the first book in Lewis's novel epic is titled Angel Armor, Just a Boy, which, yes, I do just so happen to own a paperback copy of. Yes, I know, you're all so very jealous of me, but try to calm your nerves as I present to you the description on the back of the novel, which reads as follows, quote, Lewis Williamson is not like most other teenagers. He's an eccentric Christian optimist. However, that's not what makes him special. What makes him special is that on a world full of magic, heroes, and evil, Lewis is a prophesized hero called the Linkara, and is destined to defeat a great darkness, fight off an army of dark knights, and end a 300-year war by using an armor that was imbued by angels. How does Lewis react to the news? Only one word sums it up: groovy, unquote. And underneath this description is a picture of a then 15-year-old Lewis with a bit of a bio. Quote, Lewis Lovehog is a 15-year-old currently residing in Shoreview, Minnesota. He attends Mounds View High School and enjoys a wide genre of television and books, ranging from romance and drama to science fiction and fantasy. He plays the violin and enjoys quiet days in solitude, unquote. Quite the distinguished young gentleman of culture, if I do say so myself. But enough flexing. What about the novel itself? Well, Prologue. To start, why don't we read the prologue in full? Quote, Take heed and bear witness to the writings contained herein, because they are the prophecies of Linkara, the angelic protector of sin. When the Queen of the Sun and the Queen of the Moon meet to shake hands, a great evil shall slip past them and enter the world of sin. Woe be to the inhabitants of sin, for the evil shall cast down a wave of darkness that shall blacken the waters, and will bring blight to the crops. The farmers shall wither and die, and the merchants bludgeoned by their own items of trade. Woe be to the armies of sin, for they shall be powerless to stop the evil. The shining knights shall be corrupted, and the kindest of kings shall breathe fire upon their subjects. Woe be the children of sin, for the evil crushes beings of all age beneath its heels. The wise and aged hearts shall burst, while the young and the strong crumble to dust. Know the evil servants by the color of the life-giver. The hue shall be dark as pitch, its color darker as the hierarchy nears its peak. Servants who announce themselves warriors of evil shall be clothed in sable metal, their faces never showing joy or content. Servants who work in secret shall smile and laugh, and act like all those around them, and they shall be clothed like citizens of sin. After the great sorrow that befalls sin comes to full bloom, the heavens shall demand the Queen of the Air smite down one of the darkness's higher servants. At that sign, the people of sin's hearts shall grow stronger, and they shall learn how to manipulate fire, water, and lightning. Many shall summon up the strength of the wills of men to fight back against the darkness, but shall fail because the darkness consumes both weakness and strength. Alas, the evil shall consume the hearts of mortal men, women, and children. None shall be spared from its grasp. Neither rich nor poor, good and evil shall be intertwined against an evil greater than either. Demons of every color and size shall pour out upon the 6 lands, and no sword, no arrow can pierce their mighty skin. The world of sin shall cry out to the heavens for a light that can remove the evil. Their cries shall be answered. Excerpt from the prophecy of the Linkara, first scroll, first verse, unquote. A decent opening, I suppose, if a bit cliche for a fantasy story of this sort, especially when the great evil is just referred to as the Darkness. Not the most original or creative name, I must say. But again, 14 years old, what you gonna do? Also, if it hadn't been made perfectly clear by now, now, the moniker for which Lewis would come to be known under online, his persona for the masses, his legacy. The name Linkara originally came from this book series of his. This fable of an ancient warrior set out to defeat the darkness of a fantasy world, before it became his handle for reviewing comic books and Power Rangers content online. Chapter 1. Within the end lays the beginning. After this, Chapter 1 opens with a description of our hero and protagonist. Quote, "As per usual, I've been led into a bad situation because of you. Well, forgive me for wanting to get to class on time." Lewis Woodstein sighed and sat back in the chair. He tapped the heel of his foot rapidly in impatience, waiting for his turn to go into the principal's office. Lewis was a 14-year-old freshman in Hillside High School, in the office of which he sat at now. He had short, dark brown hair, which his hands were running through in a sign of stress. He blinked, looking at the reflection of himself in the glass opposite of him. He stared into his own eyes, seeing the slight bags under the hazy blue color. He slouched back in his chair, leaning his back against the wall behind him. The boy next to him was 15, but also a freshman. His hair was a lighter brown, his eyes considerably bluer than Lewis. He was sitting quite comfortably in his chair, a smirk on his face. His name was Trevor Hagen, a standard high school freshman with an attitude so overconfident would have made Oliver North blush. He looked over at Lewis, who was obviously upset over the situation that the two were in. "Let's run through our class, Lewis. There'll be no problem, Lewis." "Trevor, I'm going to get a frickin' detention now, instead of a stupid tardy, which would have been erased at the beginning of the next trimester," Lewis hissed at him. Trevor rolled his eyes. "Oh geez, Lewis, get over it. Detentions happen, and you should get over it. It's not my fault. It was the past Nazi's fault." "Well, the past Nazi goes on a regular schedule, and if you had given me a chance to actually check the damn sheet I made of her movements, this whole thing would have been avoided," Lewis stated. "That's another thing. Why are you swearing more often now? I thought you were Christian," Trevor said. Lewis looked over at him. "Just because I'm Christian doesn't mean I have to watch my language. We're high schoolers, dude. Sure, it's not exactly the most appropriate thing, but you have to adapt to the surroundings we're in now," unquote. So in case you hadn't caught this yet, our protagonist shares the same name as its author, Lewis. If the story being about the Linkara wasn't enough of a giveaway, then yes, this story does in fact include a self-insert of its author. Now, even if he didn't share his same name, mind you, you would still would have caught on that this character is supposed to be Lewis. Why? Well, simple, it's his character traits. He's a nerd who is super cool and badass and is always several steps ahead of everyone, and gets all the bitches and kills all the dark people, dark armored people that is, and has a bunch of sassy one-liners. Sounds like someone we know? Exactly. Other than that, the dialogue is pretty stilted here, and will be pretty much the same way throughout the entirety of this book, with information kind of clumsily being revealed through dialogue that seems a little too obvious to be coming out of the mouths of the characters that's saying it, that sort of thing. This first chapter also does a lot to establish the character of Lewis to the audience, which I guess I will give it some credit for. Number one, he is a man who likes to strategize, thus why he gets angry at Trevor for not allowing him time to figure out the exact movements of the, past Nazi. Then we get this little quote later on. Lewis stared out the window of the bus. He recalled all the events of the day, from the groggy and slow beginning in English, to the attempted detention by the past Nazi, to the open topic discussion of Mr. Korma's civic class. Lewis looked to the back of the bus, glaring at it in anger because the kids in the back were once again attempting to harass the bus driver. After the third insult, Lewis finally shouted an insult back at them, and they were silenced. He smiled, enjoying the fact that he had once again done his duty in slapping out the idiots in the society he lived in and defending his fellow human being, unquote. Yes, yet another character-defining moment for Lewis. Lewis is so fucking cool. He puts bitches in their place. They fear his absolute riz that emanates from his very vocal cords. Anyway, then Lewis starts hearing the sound of a voice in his head after spotting an old-looking antique store on the way to his house. But blinks, shakes his head, and ignores it, and just goes home. But he keeps hearing a voice beckoning to him to go to that store afterward. Quote, Lewis. Lewis shivered and looked around himself, a cold chill running up his spine. He looked around himself, thinking there was someone else in the house with him. He glanced at all directions quickly, trying to discern where the voice was coming. Okay, we get it! He looked all around his room! You said it like 3 times! Okay, sorry. Hello? He called out weakly. You must go, Lewis. Lewis blinked and then raised an eyebrow. He continued looking around, still not certain as to the identity of the voice. It sounded somewhat like an adult male, but there seems to be an underlying voice within it, that of a female child. And yet the vice versa also laid with it, with a male child and a female adult. Okay. To whom am I speaking to? Lewis inquired. You must leave this place now. Why? Leave. Fine. I've watched enough anime and science fiction to know that when a strange voice starts talking to you, you do what it is said. Where should I go? To the first market that your eyes took notice of after the end of an era. Lewis was already putting on his coat and heading out the back to the garage. He stopped when he heard the last thing spoken by the voice. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He shouted. Go to the first market that your eyes took notice of after the end of an era. I heard you the first time. Couldn't you clarify a little, he requested? Go to the first market that your eyes... Oh, can the friggin' metaphor and just tell me where I'm going. First took notice of after... Lewis grumbled loudly. The end of an era. I hope you rot in hell, you stupid. Go to the... I'm going! Unquote. So yes, yet another character-defining moment for Lewis. He's a hip, cool guy. He watches anime and science fiction. He's all aware of the tropes as they're happening. And so Lewis does end up going to the antique store this ethereal voice is leading him to. After exploring the place for a bit and commenting how cliche all this is and how this is just like something from a game or an anime, he then comes across a mysterious gauntlet. Quote, there were gauntlets of varying color and size at eye level. He smiled. The image of himself punching Osama bin Laden in the face with one of the gauntlets unappearing in his head. Okay, moving on. However, one gauntlet suddenly struck out from the rest of them. It was golden, and there was dust and cobwebs covering it. It was about 1.5 feet long, with golden armor covering all sides. He reached into the shelf and pulled it out, some cobwebs coming with it that had been attached to the shelf. Lewis looked it over, one eyebrow raised. I wonder, he said to himself. Lewis slipped his hand inside of it, pushing slightly into the gauntlet. He felt a soft interior. Surprisingly enough, almost like velvet. When his hand got through to the other end, there were 5 rings attached to the ending sides of the fingers to slide through. It was a perfect fit. Heh, maybe I should just buy? Lewis stopped talking. He had just looked up from the gauntlet. He was no longer in the antique shop. He was now in a dense forest. Oh crap! He shouted, unquote. Yes indeed, the strange gauntlet transports Lewis to a new world, where our tale truly begins. And yes, this is an isekai story, if you didn't already know. Not that there's anything wrong with it, mind you, but yeah, let's see where this journey takes us next. Chapter 2, where the questions spur. So, Lewis reacts to being transported to a new world by scrimming, pissing, and shitting himself, and then thinking this whole scenario through logically. Then finally decides to start exploring this strange new world that he's found himself within, still wearing that gauntlet as it could serve as some sort of protection from, as he puts it, whatever beasties might lurk here. We then cut to a completely different scene of this character named Rain Vendre trying to buy something from a dwarf. Quote, 2 Kirkins? That's robbery, sir, Rain Vendre shouted. Take it or leave it, madam. You shall find no finer Elysian dust than mine. Took it from the mines of the 6 Sodok Mountain, where I was a minor there. There's barely any sorcery or magic in Irisel, or any town in Turlo, for that matter, which is one of the contributing factors to my departure from my beloved homelands. A profit was better made through sales here, in the ANM, than Turlo, unquote. That's a lot of, words, my dude. But the long and short of it is that Rain Vendra wants to buy some magic dirt from this dwarf that is supposed to have healing powers, and makes a deal with him to try it before she buys it, and that her word is good to trust because she's in fact a Linkaran sorceress, and they don't lie, I guess. We then get the perspective on her part and her worries about the future as she walks through this big place called the AI National Marketplace, or the ANM. Quote, Rain, however, had no family members left to celebrate the Alimus festival with. The last family member she had seen was at the Lake Vonal in Unire, attempting to fight off a wave of darkness that threatened Unire's capital, Lisol. He had been in the Heroes of the Battle of Vonal, helping drive the darkness away. Rain found it odd that most people were trying their best to get ready for a celebration and holiday instead of rallying themselves for war against the darkness. It was fairly obvious that the darkness was heading for AI. After plowing through the Zlad Delta of Gilad and heading northwest through the Unire city of Saren and Lake Vonal, one could tell that it was no doubt headed for AI to dispose of the birthplace of the largest concentration of the Linkaran faith. Perhaps I should appeal to the king, she said to herself. Ask him to begin rallying the armed forces to defend against the darkness when it finally comes. She sighed and hung her head down in sadness. What would be the point? The king doesn't even believe in the Linkaran prophecies, even though Gritsnack was killed by that tornado just as the prophecy said would happen. If only I could show some kind of proof about them. But for all we know, the Linkara might not come for another 100 or even 1,000 years, she shouted, now outside the borders of the A&M and walking into the forest. Rain kept her staff at the ready, just in case there was some demons or orcs that were wandering through the forest, unquote. Rather stiff exposition aside, we then get back to the scene of Lewis as he travels through the same forest, ends up eating a berry that he wasn't sure was going to kill him or not, and then meets a green person. Well, more accurately, he meets an orc. Well, hello then! How you doing? What? Not a big conversationalist, are ya? You don't know what I am, do you, boy? Well, you're green, really tall, evil looking. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you're Fidel Castro. The creature growled once more, this time because Lewis didn't know what he was. I'm an orc, you foolish child, roared the creature. Lewis was taken aback by this, and then backed off a little, gulping. Well, orc dude, I can see you're really busy right now. I'll come back later, unquote. Lewis then proceeds to get violently raped by the green orc and dies in the woods, never to be seen or heard of from again. Alright, not really, but upon the topic of rape, you know what, we'll get there when we get there. The orc beats the ever-living shit out of him though, and in the scuffle, his gauntlet shoots a blade out of seemingly thin air. Think Ed's metal arm from Fullmetal Alchemist. And by the skin of his teeth, manages to actually stab the orc in the gut, but not without having mortal wounds himself. Luckily, Rain Vendra happens to come across Lewis in this state, and decides he would be the perfect specimen to try that healing dirt on. Lewis then wakes up in an unfamiliar bed and is greeted by Rain, who explains to him that she healed him with the dirt, and then the two of them have a bit of a culture shock as she asked about the strange patterns on Lewis's clothes, and they have this little exchange. And where are you from? Your accent and your clothes are strange. I've never seen anything like them. Are you from the Sade Islands? Rarely do they travel this far. No, I come from the place called America. I've never heard of it. Not surprised about that. I have a question. What's the name of this planet? What? The planet. What's the name of the world we're on? A very odd question. I'm a very odd person. Sin. Pardon me? The name of the planet. Sin. Lewis rose an eyebrow in surprise. Sounds dirty. What? Never mind. Oh, come to think of it, I haven't got your name yet. Rain Vendre, first-class mage of the First Church of the Linkara. I'll call you Rain. Most people do." Unquote. After this, Rain goes to write a letter to Priest Garrick Chipria of the First Church of the Linkara about wonderful news that she believes that she just found the Linkara. Dun dun dun! But yeah, that was pretty obvious from the start, but nonetheless, some very strange habits of Lewis's writing are starting to become abundantly clear, such as his love for the word wince. He winced. She winced. They all fucking winced. You know, it's like after a while, you gotta think, could they have possibly done anything else besides winced? Why not flinch, recoil, cower, grimace, anything else besides the fucking word wince? It's, dare I say, rather cringe after a while. See what I did there? The other kind of interesting thing he does is have his character's eyebrows always doing something, often noting when Lewis's eyebrows are raised, or both of them are raised, or one of them are raised. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just like happened multiple times, and will happen multiple more times throughout the rest of the story. It's not like it's a bad thing to note what the eyebrows are doing, but it's just sort of like, what was their mouth doing? Their nose, their cheeks, eyes? No, just the eyebrows. Okay. Chapter 3, Ups and Downs. We see Rain talk to Lewis a bit about her family and the Linkara religion, and that her family died in many battles in the name of this said faith that they believe in. Quote, "In the day when the savior of 14 Kiros shall descend down to us wearing an armor forged by angels, and smite the evil that is passing through Unre, and half of sin at the moment." To which Lewis replies, "Well, I certainly hope you meet him someday. As for me, I'm Christian."
"How can you of all people question the faiths that have been taught since I was young?"
"Well, I wasn't questioning." Suddenly, Rain stormed out of the cottage, leaving a very bewildered Lewis sitting in his bed. He slowly moved his legs off the bed, wincing as a slight pain shot through them from lack of use. Ignoring the pain, he began to walk across the cottage floor after her, a slight limp to his step. He opened the door and looked around, seeing Rain in the fetal position by the nearby river. The sounds she was making seemed to indicate to Lewis that she was crying, so he approached her cautiously. Unquote. What the fuck? Well, that was sudden. Rain went from a curious and happy host to fucking psycho in a second. But Lewis pries and finds out that she's having a sudden meltdown because she believes that he is the fabled Linkara, the chosen one, the Jesus figure in their religion, meant to save the land, defeat the darkness, so on and so forth. Lewis, being a logical kid that he is, and knowing just how cool and awesome that he actually is, realizes that she might have a point, that she may indeed be correct. Why yes, I am the fantasy Jesus. How did you know? Skipping ahead some, they then end up in a tavern of sorts, and Lewis asks Rain if she could explain some of the history of sin in this land in general, which is just an excuse for a huge exposition dump, but it's not the worst excuse for one, since Lewis is clearly a huge fucking nerd. I mean, Chad, and would of course want to learn all about the new place that he's in, get the whole rundown on it, you know? So she tells lore about past religious wars before even the Linkara faith existed. And honestly, none of it is very important for the story and going forward besides this thing called the Silent Death, which is this disease from many years ago. Name the Silent Death because the first thing it disables is your ability to speak before lesions would start to show up on your neck and chest, and basically you just fucking die a terrible, painful death. That's kind of interesting lore, I suppose. Later that night, back at Rain's home, after they both get some shut-eye, Rain suddenly wakes Lewis up and orders him to get up into the attic. Lewis complies and then watches as two dark knights charge into the house in search of the fabled Linkara. Quote, "They were close to 7 feet tall, all of their attire a deep pitch black. Black metal covered their chest, legs, arms, and head, with each single piece of armor having sharp points at certain areas, like the bladed shoulders or the curved blades on the lower parts of the legs. Even the swords they carried were black, with a dark aura emanating from them.
"Where is the Linkara, woman?"
one asked. Lewis shivered instantly. The voice was low and ominous, with a commanding tone behind it that sent shivers up his spine. Okay, I hate to interrupt this, but this is like another little thing I just have to like point out. But oftentimes when Lewis reacts to something, or really any character reacts to something, he'll say they shivered or winced or whatever, right? And then in the very next sentence, he just writes what he just wrote, but longer. Like he'll add more details, but then he'll repeat himself by saying it sent shivers up his spine, even though he just said that he shivered instantly a second ago. It's really annoying to read, but moving on. "Long gone, ancient of darkness. You'll have no hope of finding him now," Rain replied, her tone firm and powerful.
"You lie. You but informed your colleagues of your pathetic church of your discovery just this morn. You could not have anticipated our arrival so quickly. Tell us where the boy is hidden,"
the other shouted at her. "And you are as foolish as you were when you first surrendered yourself to evil, blasphemer. The one who shall defeat your master has already arrived at the church and is preparing for the day when he smites your precious ruler." Rain laughed.
"We gave you the chance to spare your own life, but because of your foolish choice in this matter, you shall die,"
the first shouted, drawing his sword from his sheath. And so Rain fights off the Dark Knights with her magical abilities, killing one of them with a fire spell, and the other with like a spell that had green tendrils rise up from the ground and then pulled him into the soil of the earth to do as it pleases, as he says. However, when all seems to be secure, suddenly a third knight comes from behind Rain and stabs her. Lewis, by the way, has been watching this whole battle unfold from a crack in the ceiling floor, and so seeing this, he decides it's time to help her, and he crashes down from the ceiling, and even though Rain is literally fucking bleeding out on the floor, the Chad Lewis, or should I say Linkara, still makes some time for some one-liners. Quote, "Well, hello, Vigoda," Lewis smirked. The knight raised an eyebrow in confusion, not understanding Lewis's joke. Of course, even if he had gotten it, he wouldn't have smiled. "No sense of humor? Well, I'm not surprised. Nothing funny about what I'm about to do to you," Lewis said, narrowing his eyes.
"In the name of my master and the king of AI, I shall slay you, boy,"
the knight said, raising his sword up in preparation for the battle.
"Just keep talking, asshole. While you do,
Lewis didn't finish the sentence because the knight began charging at him, roaring a battle cry as he did, unquote. And so there's a scuffle between them. When it then appears the Dark Knight has won over on Lewis, he then suddenly uses his signature move. Quote, "I may be from another world, but I know something that should be universal," Lewis stated.
"And what's that?"
the knight asked.
"This!"
Lewis shouted, and instantly Lewis drew all of his strength up from his leg and slammed his foot into the space between the knight's legs. In essence, he kicked the knight in the crotch. Why did we need the fucking clarification? The knight's eyes went wide, his mouth gaping open, but only light sounds escaping from it. Lewis smiled, realizing his plan of desperation had worked. The knight began to shake lightly, and he dropped his sword to the ground. The knight brought his hands down to his crotch, suddenly screaming in pain as he fell over.
"Such pain! I've never been in such agony!"
he wailed. Lewis rolled over to get onto his knees and crawled over to the knight. His expression was a mix of anger and triumph.
"Abe, you ain't seen nothing yet," Lewis stated,
unquote.
"That's right, everybody. Lewis is a certified ball cruncher. And don't you fucking forget it."
Sadly though, while all that was going on in the scuffle and one-liners, Rain Vendre fucking died on the floor. Bled out. Man, that sucks. That healing dirt she had bought before, and specifically had a scene of her buying more of later on, could have really come in handy with that wound. I guess she didn't think to use it while the knight and Lewis were fighting, and Lewis, I guess, didn't think to attempt using it on her after that either. Fucking dumbass! Chapter 4. Here Comes the Sun. All jokes aside, when I first was reading through this, I was actually sort of surprised by the sudden change in tone, as I was sure that Rain was going to be a character that was going to stick around for a while longer, maybe die later, but not by chapter 3. So when the next chapter opens with Lewis standing over her makeshift grave he made for her, I was actually, dare I say, a little invested. Caught off guard, if nothing else to be sure. Quote, "Well, Rain, I guess this is goodbye," he said to the grave. "I'm sorry I wasn't fast enough to save you." Lewis gulped and sighed. "I guess you're wondering why I decided to leave. I need to go search for more answers, and unfortunately you can't give them in your current state. There are so many questions, especially with this whole Linkara bit. I'm sorry that I have to take your staff, but the kind of magic you seem to have could be useful in protecting me." By the way, do note that reading this now, I realize he went out of his way to mention taking her staff with him, but he actually never uses it ever in the story after this. So, Lewis turned his face from the grave and bit his lip. This wasn't supposed to happen. It never happens like this. The hero is supposed to meet someone who will guide them throughout the rest of their journey, and that someone isn't supposed to die before the quest even starts. What sort of hero am I supposed to be if I don't even know whom I'm here to save? Unquote. And just like that, my investment is fucking dead. It's over! The whole meta commentary thing really ruined the vibe for me. You could have just had a nice scene where he mourns this girl who he just met and who he was developing a friendship with in this world he doesn't know, and then chooses to find out what his destiny is beyond this based on the little bit that she gave him. And because she gave her life for his, and gave him some investment in all of this, which I suppose that is still there, mind you, all these elements are still there in the story, but it kind of gets lost and up its own ass when you need to constantly be reminded how this is cliche, or how this goes against the norms of this sort of fantasy type of story. Especially when you have the actual character yelling it out. It's really fucking cringy, man. But nonetheless, I guess this is the way of the Chad after all. Linkara has no real investment in this woman. He's just here to talk about how this really didn't go as per according to plan of the fantasy tropes. But nonetheless, he does vow to never forget Rain, and then travels through the woods until he reaches the church that Rain sent the letter to after 5 days of traveling through said forest and nearly dying of dehydration. He actually just straight up collapses outside of the church and wakes up to the sight of a cat girl. Lewis opened his eyes and was instantly thankful that he did. Sitting near the bed was a girl roughly 14 or 15 years old in a chair. Lewis couldn't tell the girl's eye color, but he did note a few things about her. First and foremost was her golden hair that flowed down over her shoulders and down half her back. The next thing that Lewis examined was a large tattoo on the girl's face. It laid right beneath her left eye, arranged in a pattern Lewis was totally unfamiliar with. However, the two things that Lewis paid special attention to were the ears and tail. Yes, a tail. The tail was limp at the moment, hanging down the side of a chair. It was about 1.5 feet long, slender and covered in brown fur. The ears were also something different. Instead of rounded and close to the head like normal ears, her ears extended out a little to the side and were triangular, with 2 earrings in each. A blanket made of fur from a large animal covered her sides to keep her warm. Lewis wondered how long she had been asleep. Lewis looked up to the ceiling. Please God, let me have wound up in a monastery for stripping cat girls. Unquote. Yes, indeed, there are cat girls in the world of sin. And this one is actually one of our main characters, a girl named Indo, the cat girl daughter of the priest Garrick of the Linkara church, who who Lewis also sees quickly after. Quote, seeing Lewis, both went to their knees, bowing before him. Lewis raised an eyebrow in confusion and asked, what are you doing? Forgive me, Lord. I had expected you to wish for a proper welcome for someone of your stature, he stated. What stature? What's going on around here? Lewis demanded. My lord, you are the Linkara, the holy protector of sin, the man shouted, standing up. Lewis stared at him for a moment, then smiled. Oh yeah, that. Followers of the faith, I take it. I am priest Garrick Chipria of the First Church of the Linkara, and the leader of this order. We have been waiting this day for a long time, my lord. We could hardly believe it when we received a letter from Rain Vendra informing us that she believes she found the Linkara, the man explained. Rain? You know Rain? Lewis shouted back, sitting up a little. Knew her? Yes. Before her unfortunate, Garrick replied, wincing a little and not finishing his sentence, unquote. After this exchange about Rain and whatnot, Lewis then demands that Garrick tell him the whole story and history of the Linkara religion, since he's tired of being in the dark about it all, and really needs to know what the hell they think he's supposed to be doing. He also learns the lore about the cat girls as well. I would go through the trouble of reading it all to you, but I'm just gonna skip through this and just tell you the lore on the cat girls is that they are a combination of cats and girls. Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? As for the lore on the Linkara, it was a guy who prophesized that there would be a fucking guy that came in to defeat the darkness, and people are like, that sounds good, and then they stood around waiting for him. And there's kind of a bit of a recontextualization of the prologue where he just kind of describes the prologue again. But yeah, in essence, the Linkara is the chosen one to defeat the evil guys or the darkness. We as the readers already pretty much know all this information. This is all just being repeated, I guess, for the sake of, well, Lewis knowing about it and for kind of setting it firmly down, yes, this is indeed a chosen one story. But while this is all going on, Lewis in the meantime is thinking this, quote, dear God, he thought, she's pretty. Damn hormones. I don't know if I'm feeling love or lust. Why the hell am I even thinking about this? I have other things to worry about, like destroying the darkness thing. Yeah, at the end of the day, Lewis just really wants to fuck a cat girl. He doesn't really give a shit about this darkness stuff or anything. But then, out of nowhere, a bunch of dark knights attack the church. Chapter 5. Answers and questions alike. So even though Lewis is still recovering from his 5 days of, well, fucking dying, he gets up to help with the Dark Knights downstairs, where they have just freshly slain a girl. Anyo! Endo cried, horrified by the sight. Lewis presumed that that was the name of the dead girl. What an astute observation! The Dark Knights looked over the three who had just entered and narrowed their eyes. One stood up ahead of the other two. The next presumption Lewis decided to make was this Dark Knight was the leader of the pack because of the black horns that came out from his helmet. He never remembered the 3 knights he had fought back in Rain's cottage to have the horns. The girl refused to tell us where the Linkara was. I certainly hope you can provide us with better answers, he said. Even if I knew where he was, Garrick began. I'm the Linkara, you son of a bitch, Lewis interrupted again. What about it? Unquote. Then the knights bicker for a moment. A foolish endeavor in the presence of the Linkara. Quote, excuse me, Lewis shouted, shooting the blade from his gauntlet. Well, you've been arguing over who gets to fight me. I've been thinking about 300 different ways I want to kill you. Unquote. Bro is literally calculating the exact angle of trajectory of his foot kicking their balls. I'm not even kidding. He goes on to fight them with full confidence, and then proceeds to kick one of them in the balls, and then stabs his sword through said guy's chest. This being a move they apparently never account for in this world, since both times they are utterly shocked at the idea of being kicked in the nuts. Cannot believe the pain that they then feel after being kicked in the nuts, and seem to be awestruck at the fighting tactic at all. Like, do the Dark Knights just not understand that they have testicles? Have they really never considered this to be a painful weak spot? Since they clearly have no armor there. I mean, they're described wearing all this armor, but they don't have any armor or crotch pieces, chainmail for their balls? Well, I would say no at first, and then would proceed to say that this is literally one of the dumbest fantasy universes and evil factions ever to have not accounted for this. But then there actually are Dark Knights later on that have protective armor pieces for their crotches later in the book, but like higher ranking guys, I think. But like, why don't they all just have crotch pieces then? Why even have armor if your natural weak spot has literally none? I mean, at that point, you might as well just not wear any armor at all. What's the point of all this evil, sharp, dark armor if you got no armor for your ball? Oh, okay. You know what? I've been talking about balls entirely too much, so I'm now going to shut the fuck up. But, it's pretty silly regardless. But anyway, through that action, and the help of Indo using some protective magic, they do end up killing 2 of the knights, and then capture the 3rd one for the Linkara to torture and get information from. Which he does, and ends up finding out that the Dark Knights were sent here under direct orders from the King of AI. Quote, Garrick and Indo gasped, unbelieving of Lewis of what he just said. And there's further evidence, Lewis continued. When the knights first attacked Rain's cottage, they said that they'd kill me in the name of their master and the King of AI. The knight talking about the king reminded me of it. Lewis turned to face the two. Garrick was still in shock, but Indo glared at Lewis, frustrated at what he was suggesting. That's preposterous! The king is a kind, gentle man. Although he is not of the faith, he would never join forces with the darkness. Lewis winced. Well, that's what I heard, and that's what he told me. That being in there deliberately joined the darkness. It is a product of darkness, evil and despair. We should kill it now and stop listening to the lies it spews from its mouth, Indo shouted. Well, it's my call, and I say he lives, Lewis ordered. Indo winced and stepped back, hanging her head down. Silently, she replied, You are right, of course, my lord, unquote. So, the King of AI might be an evil puppet of the darkness. But then Lewis decides he wants to read the actual prophecy of the Linkara they keep quoting from. So they all take this test where they step into a pool of water to make sure it comes out clear, because people under the influence of the darkness will make water turn black if they touch the water. Then they open up the scroll. But it's only part of the scroll, since they didn't want the prophecy to fall into the hands of the darkness, or something like that. So they split it up into pieces and put it in different churches across the land. Luckily, they just so happen to have the first one. And it basically says the world will fall to darkness under the influence of the darkness, kings turn to evil, knights corrupted, blah blah blah, all the shit that we already read in the prologue. In fact, I would actually argue at this point that the story has made this particular element of its story, the darkness taking over and the Linkara coming to save the world, about as redundant as possible by now. Darkness is coming. Linkara is good and will defeat it. Okay, cool. Let's get to that part now. However, Lewis wishes to read the other parts of the prophecy for some reason, and the second part of said prophecy just so happens to be in the church down in Waltz, the same place the King of AI is in. So they decide it's best to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, read another piece of the prophecy, and find out what the fuck is up with the king. Thus Lewis sets out on a journey to Waltz, along with Indo as his companion to help protect him. Quote, after a half-hour's ride or so, he figured he'd stop and the two could have a nice peaceful lunch in the beautiful landscape. Hey, maybe she'll fall in love with you too, he thought to himself. Lewis chuckled to his thoughts. He had thought similar things back in high school concerning other girls. He had made slight flirtations with them, but he had never had a truly serious relationship before, unquote. Yes indeed, Lewis really wants some of that catgirl ass. However, sadly for him, he suddenly falls extremely ill out of nowhere, falls off his horse, and Indo goes to see what is wrong with him, thus ending the chapter. Chapter 6. another fine mess. Now, up until this point, this book has been okay, not good mind you, but honestly it's about what I would expect a 14-year-old nerdy boy to write. Maybe even just a little bit better than some in a few places. I mean, after all, I can't say that I was writing much better or hell, an entire novel at all at the age of 14. I was a bit too busy writing terrible fanfiction at that point. But it's at this chapter where things start to get really weird. What kind of weird, you may ask? Well, how about a whole chapter that amounts to Lewis getting the silent death mentioned earlier, but like an expedited version of it since his body has no immunity to the disease. So Endo runs to a local inn to get people to help him back there to try to treat his condition, in exchange for her having sex with the innkeeper. Yeah, this isn't even the only sexual thing in this chapter either, as one of the guys who comes to help carry Lewis back to the inn is described as, quote, his hair was long and blonde. He smiled with courage and dignity as he rode atop the white horse. Endo wondered for a moment if this man was a member of the Linkara, for his mannerism and his general appearance seemed to make him look that way. She blushed slightly at some of the thoughts that ran through her head, thoughts not appropriate for a Linkaran priestess, unquote. Endo is 14, by the way. Just figured I'd, remind everyone of that. You know what's really fucked up about all this is that she ends up selling her body as a means of saving Lewis's life, and then it turns out that there's no fucking way for anyone to save him at the end, meaning she did that for absolutely nothing. Chapter 7. Secrets, Bargains, and Lies 1. Actually, no, I lied. The really fucked up part is right after, in this extremely strange chapter, about Endo selling her body to save the Linkara, and her dirty thoughts about random men. She then finds out the cure she needs is on the belt of a bunch of dark knights that waltz into the inn, and are welcome here for some reason. I mean, I guess a customer is a customer. Also, the dark knight that just so happens to be holding the cure is a woman. So Endo goes on to try to steal the potion or whatever, but is then immediately caught by the knight in question, this long-haired, dark knight woman, who, interestingly enough, decides to just give the cure to Endo, not knowing it will, ironically enough, help to save the life of the Linkara, the very person they are trying to kill. However, there is an exchange for this potion. She has to have sex with her. Quote, and secondly, you and I must have sex. Endo's eyes widened. She looked up into Mira's face, gaping at her. Pardon me? Despite propaganda to the contrary, the Dark Knights do take some pride in their work. Although we never smile, we do enjoy the rigors of physical expressions of love. We have sex, but mainly to ease tension or to produce more soldiers for the Darkness's great army. Also, my young priestess, for you and I to engage in such an activity, you would have the eternal shame of being forced to have sex with your most hated enemy. You never again being a pure priestess. Now, do you accept the terms of the agreement, priestess? Mira said. Endo turned to look at Lewis. Even though he wasn't conscious, she could see the pain he was going through by the single tear that escaped his eye and moved down his lesion-covered face. I accept, unquote. Might I all remind you once again that Endo is 14 years old, about to have sex with a adult woman character. Yeah. Mind you that this was written by a 14-year-old, as I keep noting, so maybe he didn't really think it through, or understand just how weird this whole scenario is, or how fucked up it is at the very least. Or maybe he just wanted to be edgy and fucked up and did know what he was doing, because that's just how teenagers are, to be honest. Or maybe he found all this very stimulating, if you catch my drift. Hard to say for sure for now, but nonetheless, this will not be the last time this topic or narrative device comes up, and it's only gonna get more weird and more fucked up from here. But all the same, Endo does indeed get the potion she needs. Cheers Lewis, and then right after, Lewis wakes up and walks in on Endo and Mira having sex, something that he then inquires Endo about the next morning. That's twice now you've saved my life, Endo. This is starting to stack up, Lewis stated. I live only to serve at the will of you, my lord, Endo replied. That's nice to know. Oh, by the way, I've been meaning to ask you, who was that woman you were having sex with last night? Lewis asked inquisitively. Endo froze, feeling the blood draining from her face. How could he have found out? She thought.
how did you... I woke up in the middle of the night, last night, and stumbled into where you were doing it. So, who was she? Endo gulped, her heart beginning to pound a little harder. She wanted to tell him about her unusual habits and desires, but she instantly thought of how he would judge her. A Linkaran priestess was supposed to be pure of both body and soul, and Endo was not entirely pure. To make matters worse, it had been with both a female and a dark knight. She had to try to bluff her way out of it. No one, my lord. Just the person I negotiated with the cure. It was but a one-time thing, just to get the cure from her, Endo said with a rasp. Lewis shrugged. Okay, I just never realized you were a lesbian. Endo was quick to note that she's actually bi, though, making it known she's still very much up for some Linkara Chapter 8, King's Test 1. Now, I forgot to mention them earlier because there was a much more pressing issue to discuss earlier in that chapter. But while Lewis was unconscious and dying, this guy named Lithmanar tried to steal his golden gauntlet. And well, after Lewis and Endo set back out on their journey, they then begin to be followed by him, and he is described as, quote, a boy not 17 years old, with sandy blonde hair, expensive boots, hard leather armor, and a metallic waistband. Lewis didn't recognize him, but Endo did. You're the man who tried to steal my lord's gauntlet, she exclaimed. Hey, I was only examining it to give him an advertisement for prices. But before Lithmanar could finish what he was saying, Lewis leapt off his horse and held the blade to his throat. Lithmanar froze, gulping as he looked down into the eyes of his captor. You, Lewis said, tried to steal my gauntlet? Lithmanar gulped once more, rasping out, yes, sir. Lewis smiled, releasing Lithmanar's throat. Okay, just wanted to know that. Now why are you following us? Unquote. To which Lithmanar admits that he is a thief and a merchant, and sees an excellent business opportunity, and he figures if he sticks close to Linkara, the chosen one, he's sure to make some profit, somehow. Endo is hesitant to have him accompany them, but Lewis figures his thieving skills may come in handy in the future, so he decides to let them join their party. So anyway, they make their way to Waltz and meet up with the priest of the second church of the Linkara, this guy named Dandler, who is expecting their arrival, as he says. So he prepared a meal for them all and explains to them the odd goings-on of the city and the king's strange choices in regards to the defense against the darkness and its knights. Quote, well, the king has been acting strange lately. In what way? Lewis inquired. Most of the people in the city are kept abridged of activities of the military along AI's southern border, most because of the amount of men from the city are sent there when they enlist into the army. Well, more recently, there have been reports of increased activity of Dark Knights coming across the border. The tales say that they've been ordered to avoid confrontation with them at all costs, and others say that their position are usually moving further and further away from the center of the defensive perimeter, Dandler explained. Almost as if they were openly inviting the Dark Knights to invade, Lithmanar conjectured. Exactly, and I hear that any time someone speaks up against the troop movements, they are imprisoned in the king's dungeons. It is why I am reluctant to speak of the matter, Dandler stated, wincing. It's alright, Dandler. It seems we'll have to confront the king ourselves. Not now, however. First of all, I hear that another piece of the Linkaran scroll is located here. I'd like to examine it, Lewis said, unquote. And so they go and read the second part of the scroll, which says that only the Chatnagil can fight the darkness, influence, and pure blinding evil. There shall be one uniquely gifted to wield Chatnagil, a word Lewis nor anyone else seems to understand. It also says a bunch of stuff about him wearing clothes with mysterious patterns and being a 14-year-old, yada yada yada, basically just confirming that Lewis is in fact a Linkara. In case that wasn't already clear at this point, and every other chapter saying that he is the Linkara at this point. So yeah, he's the Linkara. Also, there's a passage that says that he'll get more armor pieces the more he fights, so basically he'll keep leveling up until he has a full suit of golden magical armor. Pretty cool, I suppose. So then they go to confront the king, and see what the fuck is up with him. Lewis ready to kick some ass. Quote, my lord, I really must protest this activity. To challenge the king's authority is punishable by death.
Dandler exclaimed. Lewis continued to storm through the streets with the rest of the group close behind him, responded, "And if I am who you all seem to think I am, then I don't die just yet. I have to destroy this darkness of yours first. And if I'm not the Linkara, then I die, and you can live happily knowing your savior is still going to come. It's just it wasn't me." Endo frowned and turned her head away from Lewis. She never liked it when he talked about the idea that he might not be the Linkara. She remembered the horrible things she had to do in which to save his life, and if it had been in vain. Well, needless to say, she didn't want to live with the idea that she had to have sex with the enemy for no good reason. She sighed, wondering why she felt such impure feelings. She was constantly attracted to males, and yes, sometimes even females. She never understood why she was like this. Yes, most girls did start marrying men at 11 Kiros, but she was supposed to be a Linkaran priestess, one of pure thought and body. Endo realized that if her father ever found out about her activities outside the church, he could do more than just ban her from entering another Linkaran church. She could be thrown out of the entire Linkaran faith itself. And so she just had to request to Lewis that he not tell her father of her activities at the inn, unquote. Oh, well that's pretty cool, you know? It's kind of nice getting this little moment of reflection from Endo, and how old is the age of consent here? Fucking 11? What the fuck? I guess we'll just walk past that random bit of lore then. I mean, I guess, you know, medieval times, pretty fucked up and shit. The planet they're on is literally called Sin, so maybe this is meant to be fucked up? Spoiler alert, it's not ever brought up again in this book though, so I don't know. And so they are taken to the king after some arguments with the castle guards. Lewis saying, quote, "If you don't bring me to him, you can go inside and tell your king to get his fat, lazy ass out here, or else I'm charging in there and ripping his fucking head off." The guard glanced over at the other. They gave a nod. The guard quickly entered into the castle. As the other guard took the previous one's place, Lewis smiled and backed off the others. Going down a step or two, Dandler was breathing heavily and shaking in nervousness. "My lord, you could have killed that man. He is a protector of the light," he exclaimed. "And if the king really is working for the darkness, then he's a servant of evil. Even then, I knew I wouldn't kill him. It's just I really like to see the looks on their faces when they see a 14-year-old do a move like that. Wait until I show them how I run up a wall, and I never needed any Linkaran shit for that," Lewis said with a large smile, unquote. "God, he's so fucking cool and fucking badass and sick. Lewis is so fucking cool, guys." Bro was fucking running up walls before he ever became the Linkara. But yeah, so they meet the king, but the king doesn't believe in the Linkaran religion, and so he doesn't believe that Lewis really is the Linkara or whatever. And so he decides the best way to prove that he is indeed this all-powerful Jesus figure is to have him fight his most powerful champion, which Lewis happily accepts the challenge. Chapter 9, King's Test 2. Okay, so this chapter is like really complicated and packed with like twists and shit. So let me summarize it the best that I possibly can. So Lewis is fighting the champion guy, right? And while he's fighting the champion, Endo is exploring the castle looking for clues for if the king is working for the darkness. And while she's doing that, Lithmanar is talking with Dandler about the king and the fight that's going on, where it is then revealed that if the king is truly evil and they need to vanquish him, Dandler will become the new king to rule the kingdom, and will help in the battle against the darkness. Meanwhile, Endo ends up going down into the dungeons of the castle and conveniently overhears a gathering of dark knights down there, talking about killing the Linkara and the arrival of the great darkness and whatever, thus proving that the king is indeed aiding evil forces. Except, wait, there is a twist! A bunch of the king's knights then find Endo and grab hold of her, the story almost teasing her getting assaulted or something, before it's then revealed that the knights are actually good guys and came down here to kill the Dark Knights, which is really confusing. Did they know they were down here the whole time, or did they not? Did they just follow Endo and they're the first ones to discover there are Dark Knights down in the castle? How long were these Dark Knights even down here? And, well, before you can think about like any of that, Long enough, Lewis defeats the king's champion, and then the king himself decides to descend from his throne and take on the mighty Linkara himself. And it's then that Lithmanar has a big brain moment and realizes that this whole fucking thing is a big trap, a setup, a plot. Quote, Dandler clenched his teeth and looked at Lithmanar. What's he doing? He can easily defeat the king. Why is he not using his angelic weapons? Because he's thinking about the same thing I am, Lithmanar stated. Why didn't the king just have the boy killed the moment he arrived? He's skilled, but he'd never last against a full platoon of royal guards. I'll tell you why. Honor and tradition. It's by the king's honor that these challenges and honorable fights exist. But here's the strange thing. The darkness doesn't care about honor or tradition. They care about conquest. So if the king was in league with the darkness, why does he oblige to the honors and traditions of the past? And here's something a little more interesting. When we met, you said you had been expecting us, but Lewis and Endo told me for security purposes they hadn't informed the church that they were coming. Tell me, Dandler, when was the last time you had a life-giver test? Dandler's eyes narrowed at Lithmanar, unquote. And so it turns out that the priest was actually the one in cahoots with the darkness the whole time. And the king was just being a dumbass, I guess. Lewis, of course, also figured this out amidst this epic duel since, we can't be having another character have a cool moment all of their own. Lewis has also got to be several steps ahead of everyone and also figured out the whole thing. This twist and stuff all happens so fast, by the way. So while I do kind of like the turn of events here, it's once again very strangely paced. Like we only just got introduced to the king and Dandler and all this other stuff, so it's, again, cool in concept, but doesn't really pack much of a punch or an impact, you know? Nonetheless, they do expose Dandler for the traitor that he is, defeat him, and then they all celebrate. And Lewis bravely proclaims that now is the time to take the offense. It's time to take the fight to the darkness itself. Chapter 10, Journey of the Destined. So this chapter can be summarized as Lewis, Endo, and Lithmanar get into a debate about religion. Then they go to set out to fight the darkness, and get fucking captured along the way by a bunch of dark knights. The end. I guess going into a little more detail about the religious debate, well basically it starts with Endo being like, you Geltics are all the same. You blame the Linkara for all the problems of the world. If it were up to you, the Linkara would be responsible for any time a small child scraped a knee. And then Lithmanar was like, well, begging your humble pardon, your eminence, but you can just be quiet for a second while I tell you why your backwards religion is wrong. And then he fucking tosses a metal ball at her head so she doesn't fucking interrupt him. And then he goes on to say, the Linkaran faith preaches about some divine savior who's supposed to come and save our world from the darkness. Yet the only positive proof so far is that boy, who for all we know, could be some sprite summoned by a magician to pretend to be your savior. Not to mention that he's supposed to come from a land no one has seen or heard from, which only seems to make him more mysterious. This guy's supposed to be heavenly and sent down to us by angels, yet the angels seem to only care when it comes to the fate of the entire world. If they're so loving and forgiving, like everyone in your religion seems to think they are, why do they let terrible things happen to good people? Unquote. So, basically in short, Lithmanar is a Fedora-tipping Reddit atheist with his ironclad argument that definitely no one has ever heard before. Then Lewis walks into the room as like, on my world, the very debate you two are having has been occurring for centuries. And then goes on to say in regards to his religion, you know, God and Christianity and stuff, you think he wants it? You think he wants us to suffer horribly and experience innumerable amounts of pain? According to my religion, God gave the first two living beings free will. He didn't want living beings to be mindless automatons that didn't do anything but worship him. He wanted people to choose what they wanted in their lives. He doesn't regret his decision, but he does mourn for the suffering that people endure. Now let's stop this argument right here and head out. We've got an evil to destroy. Unquote. I kind of enjoy when these religious debates or really just very tame arguments go on in this novel, as it's clearly something Lewis, that is to say, the real-life author Lewis, if there is even much of a distinction at this point, was very passionate about at this age. Well, it may not be the most complex stuff, and it's all sort of been done before, but better. I don't know, I find these parts somewhat charming. Maybe it's because I just love things that deeply reflect the mind of their creator, like that of Chris Chan or Mike and Melissa, that sort of effect. Not that I'm comparing this to Chris Chan and Sonichu and things like that, mind you, it's just the most popular example of such a story. It's a little bit soapboxy in a way, but that too is a part of the charm. But anyway, after this big argument and they set out, like I said, they then get captured. Chapter 11, Dark Raven. So this chapter opens with our trio bound up and ready to be killed. And as they wake up, they overhear an argument going on. Quote, "We should kill them now and be done with it. The Great Darkness believes that killing him will accomplish nothing. He would be better suited joining our side."
And how exactly do you propose we convince our enemy to join our side?
"We do not intend to convince him. The darkness shall force him itself. Now we must bring them to the Zlad Delta immediately. Well, actually only the boy. The priestess and the thief shall die here." Unquote. Now I know this is one of those cliche things that villains do from time to time, but why does the darkness want or need Lewis? Why not just kill him right now? Usually this is the sort of offer a villain might make after a hero has managed to achieve many victories and have the villain possibly cornered or close to it. Or if the Linkara is integral to his plan to taking over the world, which, spoiler alert, does not seem to be the case at all. Or at the very least, if it is the case, it is never revealed to us, ever. Here it just seems like a convenient way for them to not all immediately die here, since there are plenty of other times that the Dark Knights still try to kill the Linkara, like before and after this moment. But whatever. Anyway, there is a scuffle, and amongst the scuffle, Linkara gets a sudden upgrade in the form of new golden boots. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this in the other chapter, but when Linkara was fighting the King's Champion, he also magically gained a second gauntlet there too, so he's gotten a couple upgrades now. But then, amongst the fight, a new character jumps onto the scene. Quote, "All of a sudden, a woman leapt down from the heights of the trees, landing before the sorcerer in a crouching position. The woman came up holding a metallic bow and arrow, both of which were aiming at the sorcerer. Lewis examined this new woman with great care. She didn't appear to be much older than Lithmanar, probably around 17 or 18. She wore white armor that gleamed in the sunlight with a bright intensity. Her hair was short and white." Unquote. This, as it is then revealed after she helps him out, is White Raven, the final member of our little ragtag group. Except she almost doesn't become one of the members of the party because Endo really wants to kill her. Quote, "Endo, what the hell are you doing?" Lewis shouted. "It is she, my lord. It is White Raven," Endo shouted back. "Okay, please try to remember that the guy from the other world here doesn't know what you're talking about," Lewis stated. The woman, now identified as White Raven, merely looked over at Endo with eyes filled not with anger or mistrust, but self-pity and sorrow. "My lord, please! 100 years ago, a woman joined the darkness. No one is certain why she did, but all we know is that when she did, she became one of the most feared servants of the darkness. She became known as Blood Raven for her habit of drinking the blood of her victims. She's the Butcher of Vaughn, the title given to her after she massacred a village called Vaughn, killing 500 innocent people and drinking their blood," Endo shouted. "And if that's the case, then why did she just save me?" Lewis asked. "Because I smiled," White Raven said. Lewis was particularly captivated by the voice. She had been told by that woman standing before him was a living vampire who had murdered hundreds of people, yet her voice was soft and innocent, with a touch of regret to it. "Excuse me?" Lewis asked. She smiled. No Dark Knight except for her in the 300 years that the darkness has been upon sin has ever smiled. The second it happened, she was banished from the Dark Knights, proclaimed a traitor, and sentenced to an eternal life of exile. She can be harmed by magic and fighting, but she will never age. There have been stories of her doing evil things recently. There's also the occasional story of her doing something on the side of light, but I don't believe it," Endo explained. "I do fight for the side of light. Ever since the exile, I have attempted to redeem myself for the crimes I suffered because of the darkness," White Raven said, kneeling before Lewis. "Linkara, I pledge my life
to stand beside you and destroy the darkness. However, I also allow you to play judge of my fate. If you say I should die for my sins, I shall not fight your will or your judgment, he stated. Unquote. So yeah, White Raven is an interesting character conceptually, and I think she's the closest to something that could have been genuinely very good in this book, along with maybe Endo. However, just within this same chapter, all the potential that she has is kind of just thrown away. See, after Lewis decides to let her join the group, they all stop and set up a campfire for a bit, and eventually, just Lewis and White Raven are still awake near the fire, and they have a discussion about her past, and well, perhaps I should just read it out. Quote, "You going to hit the hay too?" he asked. "I require less sleep than most humans. I shall remain here a while longer," he responded. Lewis sat down beside her, smiling. "You know, for someone who is exiled from the darkness for smirking, you certainly don't do much of it. Hell, I haven't seen you so much as curl your lips since you've been with us." "I don't take pride in my current existence," White Raven stated. "Oh? You prefer to be back with the oh-so-happy dark blob?" Lewis inquired happily. "Of course not, but I'm wondering why you didn't kill me." "I killed people. I murdered my own family," White Raven exclaimed. "I get pissed off at my family sometimes. I never went as far as killing them, but it's not like it's the end of the world or anything. I slaughtered innocents. I hit people in the back of the head when they're stupid. I drank their blood. I sometimes think my own blood taste is actually pretty sweet. I desecrated their corpses and tortured them for hours and days. I play Bocheri's My Net in orchestra every day as a warm-up. Since I always play it, it annoys the hell out of my classmates." "How can you even look at me?" White Raven stood up, almost ranting at Lewis. "I am a cold-blooded killer. I massacred and butchered hundreds, if not thousands. I drank their blood and I enjoyed every second of their screams. How could you even look at me after what I've done?" At that moment, Lewis stood up and slapped his hand across White Raven's face. She pulled off to the side briefly before going back up and seeing Lewis glaring at her. "Get a hold of yourself, woman! For fucking crying out loud! You were a different person! Just because you slaughtered thousands of people doesn't mean you're going to do it now. Jeez, you angsty characters are all alike. Oh, my life is so horrible. And oh, why can't I just die? You wanna die? Fine. Go kill yourself then. Slit your damn wrists. Hang yourself. Fall off a cliff. I don't care. But if you do, you better be ready to surrender. To face the fact that you're not strong enough to overcome the mistakes of your past. To accept that you're just a murderer without any feelings. Which is bullshit, and therefore, it doesn't matter if you live or die. However, if you decide to stay alive, you had better drop the damn depression and "oh, I'm so horrible, terrible" act, because I will get myself killed during my battle with the darkness, and I will come back to haunt you for the rest of your life, singing as many Gilpert and Sullivan songs that I know into your ear over and over again. Do you get me? Unquote. So, there's a lot to unpack here. Now, I see what Lewis, that is, the author Lewis, is trying to do here. He's showcasing a very interesting character trait for his character, Lewis, in that he's willing to forgive people who do terrible things and be an optimist to the very end. Trust them so long as they have a good heart now and are trying to do better. I actually really like this character trait, and usually these are the types of characters that I find very interesting, especially whenever their optimism is challenged by equally terrible people who force them to have to either rethink their philosophy or get stronger from it. The problem here is I feel like the character is being almost too dismissive and making a joke out of these things White Raven has done. I mean, I guess from the lol funny perspective, that is actually really funny. He's just basically like, "Shut the fuck up, bitch, I don't want to hear it." That, you know, I can kind of respect that, I guess. But also, the things that she has done are so cartoonishly evil to be fully forgiven, to be honest. It makes me kind of question what the limit is for Lewis as a character. It would be one thing if she just mindlessly killed people under the influence of the darkness, but she tortured them, desecrated their bodies, drank their blood, and actively enjoyed doing all of this. And when Lewis is so forgiving of all this, to the point that he makes a joke out of all the people
people that she killed, it does make me wonder how far is too far for him. Could you be a child rapist, and so long as you were sorry for it, you'd be okay in his books? I'm sure there were children White Raven killed, so it feels like we are actively making things a bit too extreme here. But honestly, this wouldn't be terrible still. Like, we could have these flaws just be characteristics for them and be just fine, even if I personally think it's getting to this cartoonishly silly level. But within the next paragraph or two, this whole conflict is settled. White Raven is swept up and away by Lewis's words, and this part of her character arc is almost entirely done now, besides one chapter later on. The thing that was most interesting about her flaw and story-wise is resolved the exact same chapter that she's introduced, making it pacing-wise extremely rushed and strange. Like, if she had stuck around a little bit more and there was more mysteriousness about her character and we got to know little bits more about her more and more, and Lewis got to see her actually do good things out in the world, I think this scene would have had so much more impact and would have been legitimately something I would have praised him for writing. It would have actually been pretty good, because Lewis himself would have seen who White Raven is now. But as is, he only just met her and is making all these sweeping words to her over kind of nothing. So this character arc being over and all this just feels sort of unearned. And you can sort of tell that Lewis wrote this character with this scene in mind mostly, and one other chapter about her that we'll get to in a bit. Because after a while, White Raven really falls into the background of this story and doesn't get nearly as much dialogue as Lithmanar or Endo. In fact, there were times I kind of forgot she was there at all, and she oddly enough has nearly nothing to say most of the time. And I think it's because Lewis kind of blew his load too quickly with this character in this one chapter. It's a real shame, but oh well. Moving on. Chapter 12. Secrets, Bargains, and Lies 2. So, a funny bit of trivia about this novel. If there is ever a chapter with this title in it, it means that Endo is going to be sexually assaulted, manipulated, or abused in some fashion. Charming. In this chapter, they find an inn and they all wish to sleep there, but don't have the funds for it. However, Endo, in secret, pays for their room by promising to strip in the strip club section of the inn, which, yes, this is a strip club inn, in case you didn't know. Once night falls, Lewis wakes up and decides to explore around the joint, and then decides to go to the strip club section of the inn for research purposes only, of course, only to find that Endo is one of the strippers that night. Also, while we're on the topic, since I don't know when else I'm gonna get the chance to talk about this, the name Endo is really weird, right? Like, where does that even come from? If I weren't sure it's actually something nerdy that Lewis put in that's probably a reference or symbolic of her being something, I would have just guessed it was because it was similar to the word endowed, because this woman is constantly getting naked. Quote, Lewis looked around and saw that his current location was near a strip club section of the inn. He chuckled silently, wondering if Endo has signed up to be one of the strippers. He realized that he hadn't had a good laugh or done anything strangely perverse, except for, of course, for bringing a mass murderer and a thief into his happy little clique, since he had arrived on Sin. If Sin was indeed the name of the planet, why doesn't he indulge himself in one of the common peasant pastimes on this dirty-sounding world? Unquote. Right. Something odd that he notes here as well is that he is of course only 14 years old, in a strip club, and no one is batted an eye, which makes Lewis come up with a theory. That being, quote, the working theory he came up with was that because of the shortened lifespan most people on this planet, and of women's roles in this society for them, the children might be a frequent occurrence at clubs like these, unquote. Right. And you're sure that it's the darkness that we need to be worried about in this fictional world, and not its clear exploitation of children and how generally fucked up it all is? Again, maybe this is all setting up stuff for future novels where this will be explored more in depth. I doubt it, but maybe it is. It will not come up in this novel, but you know, maybe things will eventually get there. But nonetheless, Lewis certainly doesn't seem to mind or make any sort of comment about it. Quote, Endo was on stage and performing a striptease. Lewis didn't know whether to be shocked or amused. Here was Endo, a girl who had always played humility and acted on the higher moral ground than Lewis. And here she was, on stage taking off all her clothes in front of people she didn't even know, winking at them as if she wanted them alone for her sexual pleasure. By the time she was left in nothing but a bra and panties, Lewis wanted to laugh loudly, finally realizing that everything seemed to fit together. Unquote. Pro, what is so fucking funny? Endo paid for all you guys' rooms and safe place to sleep by selling her body to a bunch of perverts. That's not fucking funny, that's fucked up. Holy shit, what the fuck is wrong with him? I swear, sometimes Lewis just generally comes off as a fucking psychopath in this novel. A pretty funny psychopath, but one nonetheless. Well, anyway, then a bunch of guys start grabbing onto Endo and trying to rape her on the stage. So Lewis then saves her and beats up the rowdy crowd. After the scuffle and a strangely out of place paragraph about White Raven going schizo in her room, we then have this exchange between Lewis and Endo. Quote, "Are you alright?" he asked. "My lord, I'm so sorry," she whimpered. "For what?" I'm such a hypocrite. I'm ready to receive rejection from the Linkara." "What?" "This is not the first time I've engaged in such deviant activities, my lord. Many times over the course of my life when I have left the church, I have done things like this. Some even worse. I am ready to be exiled from the Linkara for soiling my purity." Lewis rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Endo. Don't tell me that you've been taught that whole purity equals heaven bullshit, have you?" Endo sniffled a little, raising her head up to see her eyes meet Lewis's. She winced and turned away when she did, though. According to the Linkaran beliefs, in a situation like this, to look into the Linkara's eyes is considered sinful, and Endo felt that she was in enough trouble as it was. "Endo, why don't you just start from the beginning?" Lewis said, kneeling down once more. Endo wiped away more of her tears. "Well, my lord, it started about 2 years ago. I get odd cravings for sexual pleasure any time I left the church. When I was in the church, I could control myself, but outside the church, among so many people, I made deals, had sex, even did what I did here, dance for warriors." Lewis sighed. "And let me guess, your parents don't know?" "My mother died shortly after I was born. My father does not know. If he did, he would throw me out of the Linkara instantly, banish me from my own faith. I imagine that shall happen now with you, my lord." Endo began crying once more and grabbed Lewis's arm. "Please, my lord, kill me now. I could not bear to live without the Linkaran faith." Unquote. This is, very dark. Like, unbelievably dark, actually. And far too complex a topic than what I would expect a 14-year-old is capable of doing justice. I'll be real. Especially because it has to do with, specifically, faith, child exploitation, and her doing this all at the age of 12 originally to now? Now, to be clear, I don't think this makes him inherently weird for including it, mind you. Lots of teenagers do tend to write this way, including really fucked up topics because they've seen it in other stuff they enjoy and want to take a crack at it, or believe that it may add depth to their work, despite it being quite difficult to write well. I am an enjoyer of dark fantasy after all, and I especially love extremely dark, fucked up shit going on with characters that they have to deal with. And I guess to Lewis's credit, this is done a little bit better than White Raven's, since there was clearly some build up to all of this. That being said, however, how this plot thread is continued from here feels very bizarre to me. Quote, Lewis pulled his arm away. "I'm not going to kill you, Endo, and you're not getting exiled." "What, my lord?" "Endo, people believing themselves to be pure caused several wars on my planet and resulted in the deaths of millions. There is no such thing as pure on this planet or on mine. I don't want the church that's modeled me as their savior to think that they're any holier than anyone else. Also, do you realize how attractive you look right now?" "Excuse me?"
Endo, right now, most males of my age are having hormone production up the wazoo. That means they're going to be horny little bastards around girls, and most girls find that disgusting. To meet a girl like you, who is both bi and a stripper, well, let's just say the concept isn't unattractive, but it's sinful. Endo, committing a couple of sins is not going to send you to hell. It's when you sin again and again without any care for who you might be hurting and don't want redemption is when it gets bad. And even if this did give grounds to kick you out of the Linkaran faith, just because you fooled around with a couple of guys and stripped for others doesn't mean you're any less of a person. Feel like a whore. You shouldn't. You're kind, sweet, and frankly, I'm honored to have you at my side. Endo sniffled a bit more, and her tears of sorrow transformed into tears of happiness. She wrapped her arms around Lewis, who hugged her in return. Thank you, my lord. Unquote. In other words, Lewis basically tells Endo, nah, you should be proud of using your body as a means of payment. Be proud to be a sex worker, you 14-year-old child. Be a slut. Do whatever you want. I hope I don't have to explain to you why this is a really fucking weird, ass-backwards, and terrible message. And even beyond all that, makes Lewis, the character that is, seem like a piece of shit or just really fucking dumb. Especially when right afterward he says, quote, "You're quite welcome, my dear priestess. Man, am I on a roll. First White Raven, and now you." Unquote. Makes it sound like the characters are all NPCs to him. Characters to be leveled up on a social link. And while that is admittedly very funny, I won't lie, as far as any serious drama or character arcs go in the story, it is once again undercut and left out to dry by this very strange, psychopathic behavior. Sometimes this story almost feels like it is written to be a bit of a comedy, or like a cheesy B-movie. But then it has these serious scenes and topics and symbolism and shit later on that makes me think that no, this was all meant to be taken seriously. It is tonally one of the strangest things I've ever read, but once again, the exact kind of strange that makes it a gripping read, I must say. Jolly good show, Lewis. I literally never know what the fuck your character is going to say next. Even if it's not really good for the intended reasons, it is still very entertaining. Also, I really like how he basically just says, I'm your god anyway, and so I say being a slut isn't sinful. Also, that's kind of hot, and I'm into that, so you get a pass anyway. Chapter 13, Valor. So this chapter starts with the Lod heading back on their journey and Endo being upset because Lewis told White Raven and Lithmanar about her being a stripper, because as according to him, secrets will only separate them more, or something like that, but it just seemed to be a needlessly cruel way to embarrass her more, especially since Lithmanar mocks her a fair bit for being a whore. Lewis does get on to Lithmanar for doing this, but also, this doesn't seem to result in anything more than just pure meanness towards Endo, in case she hasn't suffered enough, I guess. Now after this is the second chapter where White Raven kind of gets something important happen with her, because she starts going schizo, and is like psychologically fucked up because the darkness, or the darkness's influence over her mind, or mind control from the darkness, I don't know, whatever it is, it's making her want to kill Lewis right now, even though she doesn't actually want to. So, they decide the best course of action is for Endo to cast a spell that transfers both Lewis and Lithmanar's consciousnesses inside of White Raven's mind, so that they can defeat the evil influence inside of her mind. Yeah, very high concept stuff to be introduced so quickly. It is actually a very cool idea though, and in a way kind of reminds me of Persona, specifically Persona 4, because they basically go inside White Raven's consciousness or subconsciousness world and defeat her shadow, or the darkness from her mind. Also, even if a bit stilted, still, I do actually kind of like this exchange between the boys. Quote, "Kid, yes? Why are we in a corridor?" "I don't know. It's just, I don't remember entering a corridor." "I know. It's almost as if
we really aren't in a corridor.
We aren't.
How do you know?
Because Endo just initiated the spell thing. Obviously, we are receiving a crude interpretation of White Raven's mind.
How do you figure? This just looks like a corridor made of yellow stones.
Ah, but there is more than meets the eye. No one truly knows what the unconscious mind can perceive. Although with dreams and imaginations, it might as well be anything they can comprehend. However, for someone else, who's in a more conscious state of mind, might not be able to perceive these things, and so our brains are interpreting the neural pathways in White Raven's brain as literal pathways, or corridors, or, for all we know, streets. Everything may seem physically real, but it's not.
Does that mean we're indestructible?
In theory, yes. But if I've learned anything from television and movies, is that you should never take that for granted. Something that attacks us here might actually harm us by sending electrical impulses into our brains, like commands to sever a nerve impulse or cut a blood vessel.
I see.
No, you don't.
You're right, I don't.
Unquote.
So eventually they find White Raven inside her own mind, fighting this dark-clothed version of herself, which White Raven then spells out to the audience. Quote, "She is a manifestation of Blood Raven. Even though I was rejected by the darkness, I still have feelings about returning to it. That thing over there represents my desire to return to the darkness," White Raven explained.
You don't say.
However, this is a battle inside the mind, meaning anything goes as far as magic and powers and shit. And so Lewis takes on Blood Raven, confidently stating, quote,
"I've got over 1,000 years worth of technological and literally knowledge on you. I've watched over 100,000 hours of television, seen over 100 movies, and I am a master of anime and comic books. And now it's time for me to go Bruce Campbell on your ass," unquote.
And so he does just that, and the two start shape-shifting and shit to fight one another in a kind of fun moment, if only because it's clear Lewis really wanted this scene to flex and include a bunch of characters and stuff he likes into the novel. However, amongst the battle, eventually Blood Raven sort of consumes both White Raven and Lithmanar into herself, and seems to be taking their energy. And so Lewis then comes up with a brilliant plan. He changes into Gur from Invader Zim. Quote, "Lewis had become Gur from the television show Invader Zim."
"Ooh, spaghetti!"
Gur exclaimed, looking up at the tentacle creature. Blood Raven was not deterred by the appearance of the small robot, launched out a new series of tentacles that quickly wrapped around Gur and began pulling him into it.
"Yay, I'm doomed!"
Gur shouted happily before being sucked inside the creature. And with Gur now absorbed, the Blood Raven creature began to laugh and gloat.
"Yes! And now that the Linkara is mine, I can tee-hee waffles. I shall return to the darkness and reclaim my squirrels. Squirrels everywhere.
Oh no,
What's happening to me? I need tacos!"
Then Blood Raven exploded, unquote. Yes, Blood Raven did indeed blow up, because according to Lewis, quote,
"I realized that if Blood Raven were to assimilate something totally stupid, she'd become stupid in return. She'd never be able to keep her sanity in check as long as she was singing the Doom song and screaming about tacos, so I figured she'd self-destruct."
This is, it's an interesting way of solving the conflict, I suppose. It's also pretty funny because it means that White Raven's shadow imploded because she couldn't stand the idea of becoming Chapter 14 plus 15, Army of Light 1 and 2. Alright, so I put these two chapters together because honestly there's no reason for them to be two separate chapters anyway. Now what's funny is that as I read these books, I made sure to take notes along the way, as anything interesting, noteworthy, weird, or just funny came up along the way. But honestly, nothing really showed itself during these two chapters. As far as content goes, basically after they save White Raven from herself, I guess they get ambushed by a bunch of Dark Knights, but then they are saved by a bunch of White Knights, and they are all enamored by the Linkara. And then the rest of the two chapters are all about a big army of Dark Knights getting ready to attack, and so the White Knights need to strategize in order to defeat the far larger army. And so, with the combined efforts of Indo's magic and ability to create illusions, including the illusion that they actually have more army people than they actually do, Lithmanar and White Raven fighting, and Lewis being an all-powerful, super smart god at everything he does, they managed to defeat the army. Obviously, there's a lot of drama in here, and I'm skipping a lot. But hey, we gotta start cutting to the chase here eventually. However, overall, I would say that I somewhat enjoyed these 2 chapters. They weren't the best writing-wise, and again, could be a little bit stilted. In fact, they were very stilted very often. And yet still, I enjoyed the battle that they showcased and the way the characters played off of their abilities to win said battle. So overall, these 2 are a pretty good highlight in the novel overall. Chapter 16, Signs and Portents. This chapter opens with Lewis finding this big memorial out in the city they were trying to head to, and it has the name of Rain Vendra's brother on it, to which he speaks to him and tells him about his sister, and how she died for the cause just as he did, a brave woman. It's actually a completely decent scene with no real issues and serves, I think, as a strong moment of character definition for Lewis, and a reminder that yes, people are dying for this cause all around him, and he plays an important role in making sure none of them died in vain. Even if he's a Christian and doesn't really believe in all this stuff, he's willing to play the role they want, if only to avenge those who have fallen for a better world. Good stuff. Actually, while we're on the topic, I suppose I ought to address the elephant in the room, and that is that Lewis, or the Linkara, is literally Jesus. I mean, it's pretty obvious narratively, but when you look at who he surrounds himself with, that being sinners, a thief con man, a once evil warrior with the literal embodiment of darkness who's killed thousands, a cat-girl whore. All these people are sinners in their own right, and yet Lewis happily accepts them as his equals, and tries his best to make them feel better. Even if some of the messages he gives them are a bit sketch from time to time, his heart is in the right place, I think. Either that or he's a really horny psychopath, one of the 2. Still, because this is a self-insert, this is a bit funny to think about, and is almost a what-if story if Lewis was Jesus. What would he do? It's pretty conceited, one must admit, but also, yet again, very funny, so I can roll with it. But anyway, the next scene opens like this. "My own daughter! A whore! 'Tis bad enough you traveled alongside a thief and a mass murderer, but you are also a whore?" Garrick shouted and kicked Endo in the stomach. Lewis growled as Garrick was about to kick Endo again, and he got between her and him. Garrick tried to push Lewis aside in his rage, not recognizing him as he continued to shout at Endo. "You are banished! Not only from the Linkara religion, but as my daughter. You are no longer my daughter, you whore!" Unquote. So yeah, Endo's father isn't too happy about his daughter having sex with a bunch of people. But Lewis is Jesus, and this is his religion, so he basically comes in and fucking backhands Endo's father and tells him to accept his daughter or he'll fucking kill him. And then Endo and her father have a moment of understanding by force of gun. Then Linkara reads the 3rd part of the prophecy about horses with 5 heads and this big apocalypse scenario coming to pass for the final battle of the darkness. Yada yada yada, that sort of thing. It's just more, Linkara's gonna fight the darkness, it's gonna be a big cool battle, you get it. Then, Linkara and Endo have a moment of romance together that's okay, I suppose. Quote, Endo blushed and returned the hug, closing her eyes a little as Lewis held her a little tighter. Endo, I'm going to make a promise to you. I'm not going to let the darkness or anyone else hurt you. This promise goes to the others as well. That damn thing has hurt too many people, and I'm not going to let anyone else get harmed or die by its hands. I care too much for you to let it, Lewis stated. Endo smiled, and the 2 backed away, but still kept their arms near each other. Lewis and Endo opened their eyes so that they could meet each other's gaze, and their eyes stared into each other. They blinked a little. Then, on instinct, their heads began to slowly come closer to one another. Both stopped, breathing as they just continued to come closer to each other. Their lips were almost an inch apart at this point. They were about to kiss one another. But then, oh no! The sky starts fucking raining blood, bitch! Chapter 17, Horsemen of the Armageddon. So the sky is bleeding, as per the prophecy, and so they need to go to where the darkness is and, well, kill it. But on their way to the place, they start talking about, what else, but religion once more, with Lewis talking about Christianity and the Bible, and once again, sort of going on a little soapbox about the whole thing. I suppose so, but isn't this Bible of yours the Word of God? See, that's where most people screw up. God never wrote the Bible. It was written by men. The men who wrote it either had a direct or indirect communion with God, or they had seen other people have that communion with God. Either way, they both tried to interpret all they saw and put it down on paper. And the next problem is that a lot of stuff in the Bible reflected the ethics and beliefs of that time period. In that time period, slavery was okay, homosexuality was an abomination, and working on the Sabbath day was punishable by death. Some people in my time take the Bible as the absolute word of God, and because of that, they become arrogant tight-asses. To them, it's become more about judging other people for their religions and or personal beliefs, instead of about Jesus' love. What should it matter who or what a person is screwing as long as both God and Jesus love them? Hell, God loves even terrorists. Of course, with them, he takes more of a tough love approach, in which he sends them to hell, but that's a different issue altogether. The point is, anyway, that so many people in my time are focused on the book and the words in it instead of the message. And what is the message, Linkara? That Jesus died on the cross for our sins, that he loved every single person living or dead, and maybe instead of acting like we're holier than thou, maybe we should start trying to teach people about why a religion is great. Geez, do I hate stupid people that are on my world, unquote. So yeah, then later on they meet Mira. Remember her? She was the Dark Knight that Endo had to have sex with in order to get the potion for Lewis? Well, she's back, and she's upgraded, as she is now one of the Darkness's 5 powerful horsemen, as per again the prophecy, and has new powers that allows her to kill people with her touch. And she's allowed to express emotions now because she ranked up? Honestly, it's never really explained why Dark Knights need to be emotionless to begin with, or else they are casted out of the Darkness's ranks. Like, they vaguely explain it, but it's never really explored, and here it just feels like Lewis wanted an excuse for why Mira is laughing maniacally, and, well, what comes shortly after this. See, Mira is like, ha ha ha, I am super powerful, and I remember you, Endo, the one that I violated? Yeah, you remember you? I remember you, the cat girl. Hey everybody, I violated that one, ha ha ha. And Endo was like, yeah, well, I did that because I was able to save Lewis, Linkara, so you directly helped in saving the Darkness's enemy, you dumbass. Which, yeah, fair comeback, honestly. But this gets Mira pretty pissed, and after a little battle, she kidnaps Endo and kills the Lot's horses, but doesn't kill Endo and doesn't kill anyone with her touch. So White Raven and Lithuminar are like, well, I guess Endo is dead now, because she's definitely gonna die in Mira's hands, so I guess let's go defeat the Darkness without her. To which Lewis is like, I love her, and you guys are being total bitches for just resigning her to her fate immediately. And you're supposed to be her friends, so we're gonna go after her now, weirdos. It's honestly not a bad little back and forth and, I don't know, raising of the stakes. Except Lewis, that is the author, Lewis, has to make sure to take you right out of the moment, or at least take me right out of the moment by stating, quote, Lewis winced and clenched his fist tighter. He was now facing the dilemma so many protagonists of TV, movie, and literature had faced so many times before. It was a paradox that never had a true answer, whether to go in and attempt to rescue and risk Endo's life, or to wait and allow her to be taken away by the villain anyway, unquote. Except that's never a fucking dilemma, they always go to save them in the story, so that doesn't even... But whatever, I've already complained about why this writing trope is super annoying to me, so let's move on. Thus, we start the most infamous chapter of this novel. The one that, even if you know nothing about the book, which is pretty much almost everyone, if someone does know about the book, there will be one thing that they bring up. One single aspect, well, maybe besides the name Linkara comes from it, and that is that Chapter 18, Secrets, Bargains, and Lies 3. The chapter where the Catgirl Endo gets violently raped. In short, this chapter features Mira torturing Indo for days and days on end, while Lewis and his lot continually chase after her, as she moves from one torture scene to the next. This torture includes beating her, cutting her up, and eventually, yes, raping her for hours endlessly. Now, this is never described in gruesome detail, and is written rather matter-of-factly actually, but it is still nonetheless yet another extremely crazy dark turn of events, especially for this poor slutty cat girl. You gotta feel bad for her at some point, as she is constantly the conduit for young Lewis's dark fantasies and strangest bits of edgy writing. Quote, however, not only were her wounds untreated and uncovered, but also her whole body was uncovered. She also could feel very little from her arms, which were suspended above her head thanks to the rope tied to the ceiling of the cave. By now, all the blood had drained from her arms, making her feel all the more powerless to stop Mira. So far, prior to being tied to the cave ceiling, Indo had been stripped naked and now cut in addition to the blows and whippings delivered by Mira. Mira also insisted that Indo call herself Mira's whore, which only added to her humiliation. Lack of food and water had begun to take its toll on the priestess, who was having a hard time forming coherent thought and focusing on any particular thing. Her body was littered in cuts and bruises, some where the bleeding was only now coming close to stopping. Both her vagina and anus were sore from being raped by Mira, unquote. Well, that's charming. Again, not that this stuff can't be in stories, mind you. Hell, I'm a huge fan of stuff like Berserk as an example, where there is, well, rape aplenty. It's just in combination with everything that this character has been used for as far as a, message of sexual freedom and whatnot, it just all comes across as really weird here. And look, there's something I've been hesitating to talk about because I want to talk about it in more detail later, since I believe a man's art should be separate from himself as much as I can, unless it's like a direct connection between the two, which you could argue, since Lewis shares the same name as Lewis in the book, maybe there is that connection. But nonetheless, let's just say that knowing some things about Lewis outside of this novel, particularly stuff regarding a certain green M&M, makes me ponder upon how much of this was written purely for the fact that he was getting off to it. But regardless, that's just conjecture on my part for the time being. As it stands, it is actually a fairly fucked up chapter, as this torture and both physical and psychological warfare goes on for some time. But regardless, the chapter does end with Lewis saving Indo from Mira, with her just sort of running away. Even though she's super powerful and can probably kill them with her touch, for some reason she just runs away. Though before she does run away and Lewis does end up saving Indo, Mira actually tried to convince Indo into joining her and the darkness. They would be the best option for her, which, I mean, okay, don't you think that would have been something to try convincing her of before you raped her violently for hours? Like, holy fuck. Maybe she figured she just had psychologically broken her at this point, and anything she said would be enough to get her to join her side, but I don't know. Seemed kind of random a thing to bring up after so long of nothing more than just torture going on. But anyway, the four leave, with Mira never being seen again in this novel. Perhaps someone to be seen in a future sequel. Who knows? I mean, well, I know, but anyway. Chapter 19, Man in the Middle. This chapter is kind of a calm before the storm of sorts, where Indo recovers in a hospital and she and Lewis have a little moment together, with him protecting and taking care of her, at her side in this time of pain. And it's actually handled somewhat okay, at least. Then Lifminar has this Han Solo moment, since he's clearly Han Solo of the group, with him doubting if this is all worth doing. And he has to sort of admit to himself that he's not just doing this for the money anymore, but because he actually does care about this group and for the cause and, you know, that sort of thing. That's pretty much it, though. I mean, I suppose it is a nice character moment for Lithminar and for the group in general, so overall, not too bad. A pretty good chapter, especially since it could have easily been very cringy and very, very strange to follow up that, well, extended torture scene with anything humorous. I mean, it probably would have been the apex of the humor at this point, that not even that is off limits for the Linkara Lewis to, shimmy aside, but in the end, no. I guess he decides that it's too much, and he should probably make things a little more serious and somber for this time. And so they all head off to face the darkness itself, in the city where it's been held up, Soya. No, really, it's actually called Soya. Chapter 20, The Dead City. So this chapter opens with the group arriving at Soyland, and it's not at all what they were expecting. It looks like a bright and happy city full of life and nice people, all of whom seem to be happily under the reign of the darkness, and welcome the world that it is bringing about. Quote, "Pelmore joy, strangers!" Children had run up to the group and placed wreaths upon their heads. Lewis was briefly beginning to think that they had entered the equivalent of Hawaii for sin. Everyone was friendly and said hello when they passed, and the children were laughing happily and giving them gifts. "What's Pelmore joy mean?" Lewis asked. "It's a common phrase around this time of year. It is an annual tradition of happiness and joy for the city, reminding us of the time 300 years ago," the knight who was leading them to the castle replied. 300 years ago? But the only thing that happened then was the darkness's appearance, Indo stated. "Exactly. Do not worry. The king shall explain all things to you," the knight responded. Lewis and Indo exchanged worried glances. From what they could tell, the people of this town were actually celebrating the arrival of the darkness, unquote. An interesting turn of events. However, this illusion doesn't last for much more than a few more pages, before the group then realizes that this whole thing is just a big trap set up by the darkness itself, and is in fact just illusion magic. So they end up fighting a bunch of Dark Knights and demanding that they take them to the darkness immediately, to meet with their leader once and for all. However, that's when the darkness finally shows itself. Chapter 21, Face of the Enemy. Sorry if I'm moving rather quickly at this point, by the way, but these chapters really have been far shorter, and sort of been moving at a quicker pace anyway, which I'm not really opposed to since we're at the finale of the novel at this point. It's actually kind of refreshing to kind of move into the finale with some brisk pace. Doesn't feel too rushed either because there's been enough build up to this darkness thing at this point that I just kind of want to see what it's like. And you know, it's also because we've been talking about this book for 2 hours at this point, so let's cut to the chase, right? Quote, 6 feet tall, with black hair and pale skin like the Dark Knights made up this man. His eyes were colored a deep brown, and his physique looked rather muscular and strong, despite whatever was hidden behind his dark clothes. His eyes, unlike those of the Dark Knights, seemed warm and happy. He had no weapons with him. In fact, he did not appear to be much of a threat at all. However, what made him appear to be creepy to the group was the fact that the man was smiling and baring all his very white teeth to them. "We admit, my dear Linkara, you are a very difficult man to invite to my home. We had been expecting you to come calmly with my knights to this location. Instead, you killed them all," the man said, his voice deep but passionate, unquote. Please note that they refer to themselves as "we" here. It's going to be important later on. Also, further note that the darkness also refers to its home and its knights as "my" instead of "ours." That will also become important later on. Trust me. Quote, "You know, it's funny. You're not what I expected you to be," Lewis stated. "What were you expecting?" "Honestly, a big bloppy thing of dark stuff." The darkness chuckled. "We know. We can assume many different forms, and we decided that this was probably the best to use when meeting with you," unquote. So then there is a conversation that happens between the darkness and the group, with him appealing to them to understand his way of thinking, and also offering things like the White Raven to come back into his ranks, which White Raven replies with, "My name is White Raven, enemy of the light," which I think was supposed to be enemy of the dark, or warrior of the light, or pretty much the opposite of what she said. But Mistake like that aside, Lewis, however, is having none of the darkness's sweet words of encouragement or kindness. Quote, Lewis smiled, and I invite you to kiss my ass. The darkness's smile faded away, his eyes narrowing.
You really don't understand who you're dealing with, do you?
Lewis rolled his eyes and chuckled. You really want to know who I think I'm dealing with?
We believe that we know already, but you can confirm my suspicions.
Lewis grinned, putting his blades at his sides. I think I'm dealing with a being that sees itself as a liberator. It sees itself as a bringer of change, an idealist, so to speak. You're an artist, painting the world to what you see as the ultimate form of self-expression. You see yourself as a visionary, a leader, a scholar.
Yes, Linkara. That's exactly—
Shut up!
Lewis interrupted.
The darkness blinked, allowing Lewis to once again speak. Lewis's grin disappeared. However, despite your opinion of yourself, you're an egotist. You're overconfident, destructive, and lashing out at things that disagree with you. You see those around you as inferior because they either haven't achieved the clarity that you have, or are only close enough to your level but have not gone far enough. You manipulate people into serving you and accepting only your ideals and beliefs. You remain in constant watch over them, ready and able to strike them down the instant they begin to express individuality. You're Big Brother. No, I take that back. You're not a powerful government that wants total suppression of free will. You're a weak little adolescent with a Hitler complex because you're afraid everyone's going to find out how small your penis is. The group stared at Lewis in disbelief, once again not able to fully comprehend Lewis's choice of words. The darkness narrowed his eyes, once more at Lewis, his fists clenching. Then he closed his eyes and bent his head down slightly, smiling.
Well, this hasn't exactly gone as we had wanted. We had hoped that you would listen to reason. Use some of that tolerance that you seem to pride yourself on,
the darkness said. I don't tolerate dictators, Lewis growled. The darkness sighed once more, keeping his head low.
Well, since you won't listen to reason, perhaps a more direct approach shall be necessary,
unquote. And so they start to fight the darkness, but then realize that he has telekinesis powers, and starts wiping the floor with them, so they make a run for it outside of the castle. That's where they see the dead city and the illusion fully gone, with dead bodies, dark clouds, and yeah, pretty much dark, evil, lord world shit. Then the darkness makes its way outside and Lewis shouts, to quote Invader Zim, I'm really looking forward to twisting you into a twisted, horrible knot made from you! He shouted, pointing at the darkness. To which the darkness responds in kind by kidnapping Endo. Wait, what the fuck? She's gotten kidnapped again, bro? How many fucking times is she gonna... Okay, whatever. And the darkness is like, you can return to my castle and reclaim her when you're ready and get your strength back. Why? Like, I get that the darkness for some reason really wants to have Linkara join his side, but he hasn't really made it clear as to why, or why he doesn't just fucking kill them all right now, since he clearly could. Like, is he just fucking stupid or what, man? Kill them now! Crush them! Kill them all! Destroy the child! Chapter 22. Et tu, my friend. So they take up a little abandoned inn in the dead city, and Garrick, again Endo's father, meets up with them there. And it's here where the final piece of the Linkara prophecy is read, and it's rather ominous. Quote, it would appear that the Linkaran man who wrote the prophecies wasn't sure what the outcome would be in your battle with the darkness. He wrote 2 different prophecies about the outcome. The first, as I quote, when the darkest time comes, the angel shall rise from his suffering 1,000 times stronger, the light that his companions shine rejuvenating him, and he shall utter a word that shall defeat the darkness once and for all. Lewis blinked. And the other? He shall forfeit his life in order to save sin and destroy the evil once and for all. Lewis stared at him for a moment, then shrugged and turned to the door once again. Okay, whatever. Lewis, don't you understand? You couldn't be... Armageddon. Lewis interrupted him. I could be what? Lithy? Killed? Ha!
Death is such a limited concept. Maybe I will die after I defeat the darkness. But I don't care. We're all going to die someday, guys. I've been prophesized to kill this thing, and I don't like letting down the powers that be, okay? You don't want to give up your life? Well, fine. Neither do I. However, the simple fact of the matter is that win or lose, I'll go down fighting. And with that, Lewis promptly turned and walked out the door, the others sighing and exchanging glances. Unquote. By the way, the others don't want to go back and fight the darkness now because, well, they figure he's like way too powerful for them at this point, but Lewis is unafraid. So he makes his way back to the castle of Soy again, and ends up sitting at this big table where Endo and the darkness are awaiting him. Quote, "Ah, welcome, Lewis. Please have a seat at my table. We're sure you'd like to get through this matter very quickly. You must have many questions. All we ask is that you hear my side of the story before you try to fight me," the darkness said. Lewis smiled and nodded. Sitting at the chair opposite the darkness, he turned to Endo. "Are you alright?" he asked. She nodded, looking up and smiling up at him a little. Lewis smiled back, then turned back to the darkness. Unquote. So the darkness at this point starts talking about why it killed everyone in this city. It explains that the Dark Knights are all conduits of him, meaning he can see through them basically. This is also the part of why the darkness refers to itself as we. Quote, "You keep saying we instead of I. What's the big deal?" Lewis raised an eyebrow. When he saw the darkness looked uncomfortable. The darkness then returned to his former state of happiness as he started cutting into a piece of steak. "The Dark Knights exist with us in a state of collective consciousness. We can command them with our thoughts. And so, since we all share one mind, we can either refer to ourselves as me or we," the darkness explained, then placed a piece of steak in his mouth. Lewis smiled. "Oh really? How interesting. So you've been keeping tabs on me every time I've encountered any Dark Knights?" The darkness nodded. "You've had quite an interesting adventure. It will be nice to have you on my side." Lewis shook his head. "Oh no, I don't think that'll be happening anytime soon." "Oh? But we believe that it will," the darkness replied. Lewis stood up. "No! I don't think it will. I don't care if you think you're creating the perfect beings by removing their ability to be hopeful or happy. You're still a murderer. You murdered the people of this town, and then desecrated their remains by using necromancy. You've killed innocent people in cold blood, simply to try and advance your own goals. Your troops have raped women and children, and since you share a telepathic bond with them, you are guilty of those crimes as well. And you killed Rain Vendra, the sorceress I befriended when I first arrived in this shithole planet, and I think that it's time Endo and I left. Huh. So I wonder if that means that the darkness, was always aware of what Lewis looked like? Kind of makes times when the knights saw Lewis and didn't know it was the Linkara not make much sense. Also doesn't make much sense that the ball-kicking maneuver would work more than once, since, surely he would have had to have figured that out by that point. It's a bit, this plot discovery twist is a bit, shaky to say the least. But nonetheless, with that, Lewis grabs Endo and they start to escape the castle. And that's when Endo suddenly stabs Lewis in the side of the leg. Quote, "He looked back and saw Endo standing over him, tears falling down her face. Although Lewis felt remorseful for her tears, the pain of having a very sharp object sticking into him was much more fresh in his mind. What the hell was that for?" "I'm sorry, my lord, but I love you," she responded. "You stabbed me because you love me? It too, Brutus?" "I know not your worlds, my lord, but allow me to explain. I love you like I love no other. Unfortunately, you could never love me like I love you. That despicable creature promised me your love if I give you to him," Endo explained. Unquote. Huh? What? Where the fuck did this shit come from? Talk about a total character assassination. What the fuck? He already said he loved her, has spent half this book saving her ass and helping her out of bad situations, and they had grown so much closer together, and now all of a sudden, she decides he would never love her, and that the best course of action is to hand him over to the darkness so his free will can be taken away and be made to love her? After her free will was taken away from her for weeks by a member of the darkness while she was being raped and tortured? What
the actual fuck? This has got to be one of the dumbest moments in this book, and it comes at the finale of the story. No real build-up, and spoiler alert, is going to be brushed aside like it was nothing shortly thereafter. It makes me wonder if Lewis, the author, wanted to make some sort of Judas angle for Endo here, in that he has the fantasy Jesus get betrayed and handed over to the darkness and what have you. But if that is the case, it makes no sense for it to be Endo who does this, and there is no real further allusion to it other than that. It only really seems to serve the purpose of making Endo as a character seem really fucked up and like unbelievably idiotic, and narratively only serves to just get him back into the room that he was already in. It would be one thing if she was being mind controlled and the darkness sort of played into her worst fears and what have you. It would kind of work then, but that's not what happens. She just goes full on psychopath for no reason. But anyway, Lewis is escorted back to the darkness, and he decides that the best course of action is to have their conversation continue inside of Linkara's mind. Chapter 23, Boss of Me. So this chapter is very similar to the one where they went inside White Raven's mind, except now it's all inside Linkara's mind. And it's basically this big debate between the darkness and Lewis in regards to, the world, individuality, that sort of thing. And the darkness trying to convince Linkara to join him again, but never stating why he wants him to join him, what benefits there are to joining him, and frankly, weirdly enough, Lewis never asking this question either. It is kind of interesting still, because they jump through different TV shows and stuff that Linkara, or Lewis, is a fan of, such as starting out on the bridge of the USS Defiant from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Then they move on to a dueling arena in Yu-Gi-Oh! And then the Council of Elrond from Lord of the Rings, and then back to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arena again, and to the lab of Washu from Techi Muyo, and to like a Borg cube from Star Trek, the apartment of Monica and Chandler from fucking Friends for some reason, and then finally the cabin from Evil Dead. All this while they have a debate that amounts to the darkness saying free will and individuality are bad, and only get in the way of progress and shit like that. And Lewis rightfully saying, that's cringe, and I'm gonna make a soy jack out of you now. And darkness is like, me? A soy jack? You turn me into a soy jack? Me? And then they fight, and the chapter ends with Lewis breaking free of the darkness' spell, and we enter the final chapter of the novel. Chapter 24, Last Words. So the darkness then starts to reveal its true form, a black blob of tentacles and abstract shapes, and grabs hold of Linkara to feast upon his blood, when then Endo saves Lewis's life by casting a protection spell on him. Lewis immediately forgives Endo after she apologizes for the crazy shit that she just did, once again rendering that entire dumb plot twist pointless, and then they run out of the castle as it starts to collapse. The others in the group decide to join up at the last second and help Lewis as well. Then as the darkness grows and they watch as its form casts a shadow over the land, quote, "My lord, look!" Endo shouted, pointing at the castle. The group had managed to get a good distance away from the castle by this point, and that was considerably good for them, considering that the castle was caving in on itself. Black tentacles whipped out into the sky as black ooze seeped out of the windows, crushed the walls. The great castle of Soya fell, and its once proud walls dropped forward and were ground into dust by the darkness. As the darkness finally stopped growing, amounting to the size of the castle that had once stood in its place, the group began to notice that things were getting considerably darker. They looked up, seeing dark clouds fill the sky and turn it darker than the gray mist that had once been there. Night had fallen sooner than it was meant to. "And when the darkest time comes," Lewis whispered. "My lord?" Endo asked. "Your father brought along the last passage from the Linkaran scroll. It would appear that everything's coming to pass," Lewis explained. "My lord, how can we ever hope to stop such a beast?" Garrick shouted.
You guys aren't gonna be able to do jack diddly. I, on the other hand, have a prophecy to fulfill, Lewis replied, unquote. And with that, Lewis began running towards the darkness. In his now full set of golden armor, he got the other pieces along the way as he leveled up. I guess I just kind of forgot to mention them. Darn. He gets the final piece here, though, a golden pair of wings that lets him fly up into the air to face the darkness head on. Quote, could this really be the end of our journey? The final battle that was prophesied so long ago? Endo asked. Yes, my daughter, it is. Today is the day that shall forever be remembered with joy. The day the Linkara fought the darkness and vanquished it once and for all, Garrick replied exuberantly. 'Tis exciting, Endo laughed. Yeah, but in case you two haven't noticed, we're all but spectators in this combat. I wouldn't mind some glory being handed to us for all our hardships, Lithmanar stated. There's nothing we can do. This is the Linkara's fight now, White Raven stated. Maybe not, Endo exclaimed, snapping her fingers, unquote. That's when Endo casts a spell that saps the energy from her and the others and gives it all to Lewis, making him light up like a star, this being the true final piece to complete the prophecy of the Linkara, the warrior of light, that light coming from his friends, the bonds he made along the way. And yes, this does mean that the power of friendship saves the day, but it's a nice moment. Quote, darkness, hear me, Lewis shouted. It would appear that the Linkara has come to see us. Tell me, boy, does your pathetic world have a better chance at stopping us than you? Probably, the darkness chuckled. Still, you shouldn't be so confident with yourself just yet. And why is that? Because you have a weakness that is known to me. A word that the Linkara shall utter that will defeat you, as the prophecy said. And what sort of word would that be, little man? I! All of a sudden, the darkness lurched. It seemed to jiggle in fear and despair. Lewis smiled, grinning at the creature. It took me a little time to understand, but there was a deeper meaning behind your switching of personal pronouns. You can't bear the idea of individuality. And what word and letter pretty much sums up individuality? I, Lewis explained. The darkness once more lurched and shifted uncomfortably on the ground, making the area rumble and shake with it. It's funny in a way, oh great darkness. When referencing the country AI, you don't even quiver. But when spoken as I, the darkness wavered and twisted around its liquid-like body, groaning in pain from hearing the simple word. It's the most painful thing you've ever experienced, isn't it? It's even more gut-wrenching than the electrical pulses I sent through your brain. You've been preaching suppression of free will and emotion for so long that the idea of individuality and freedom is painful to you. It's time you met who you're up against, darkness. I am Lewis Williamson, prophesized destroyer of evil, champion of AI, hardcore Star Trek fan, Christian, and keeper of the legacy of Reign Vendre. I call upon you to leave sin and return to the dark hole from which you spawned, Lewis shouted. Never! Unquote. This is also a pretty nice moment, and I like the overall message and idea here. Fuck collectivists. All my homies hate the darkness. But just one little nitpick. Remember how the darkness would say my instead of our? Wouldn't that also be a word that signifies an individual rather than a collective? Maybe it's just the word I, but it seems like adjacent words would also have a similar effect. No? What about the word me? Would that also have a similar effect? It seems as though it does not. This is sadly one of those things that I think old Lewis just didn't quite think thoroughly enough about when writing the story. But I can appreciate what he tried to do here. It's a pretty cool little twist, and I am a sucker for like big evil, destructive gods of whatever being defeated in a very simple way. But anyway, the darkness leaps forward, but then is destroyed by the Linkara's light, rendering it completely destroyed within moments. It becomes but a mere pebble of light and then evaporates.
but with the Darkness's death, the Linkara is nowhere to be seen. Quote, "Where's the kid?" Lithmanar asked, clutching his sides in pain. "It appears the second prophecy was the correct one," White Raven stated, cracking her knuckles. "Second prophecy?" Indo asked, turning to face the others. The original Linkaran man did not know the final outcome of the battle. Although he knew that the Linkara would be victorious, he knew not if the Linkara would survive it or not. Since he is nowhere to be found, we must assume that the second prophecy, which foretold his death in battle, was the correct one. "I'm sorry, my daughter," Garrick explained. Endo thought about this new information for a moment, then smiled and looked up at the sun. "It matters not, father. I did love the Linkara, Lewis, but he did more than just capture our hearts. He showed us that hope and faith still exist in this world, even when the darkness has taken everything. He rescued me twice from harm, and he was my friend. He never stopped believing in us and this world, and he never gave up when things got difficult. He protected those he called his friends, and even helped us understand a little bit more about this world than we ever thought possible." Garrick approached Indo and put his hand on her shoulder. "We shall build a statue here in memory of the Linkara. It shall be 100 feet tall and made of the most indestructible stone, and we shall never forget the kid," Lithmanar said, smiling. "We shall always remember the one who dressed in patterns most mysterious and wielded the Chatnajil. And the answer to what Chatnajil is simple. It was light. His light shall forever remain in us until the end of time," White Raven stated, also smiling. Indo looked up at the sun once again. It was going to be a beautiful day, unquote. Epilogue! The story ends with an epilogue of Lewis waking up in a sandy area, unsure of where he is, and then he proceeds to defeat a dragon and the guy who is controlling and riding the dragon quite swiftly, and then starts being celebrated by the people who are running away from said guy atop the dragon, which is all just a big Evil Dead ending reference and ends on a cliffhanger as to what adventures may come next for the Linkara. Quote, "Hail he who has flown through the skies and delivered us from the axe of the Terrafell Arbiters," the man shouted. And as the men began to chant hail over and over, Lewis could only stand and gape at the parallels he was experiencing between this moment and the end of the movie Evil Dead 2. Lewis groaned, realizing he did not want to do the same line that Bruce Campbell had done at the end of the movie, a very dignified and repeated "No!" And so Lewis responded to his new situation with the enthusiasm he has shown throughout the past few weeks. Oh, god damn it! To be continued. And that's the story, or abridged version, of Lewis's first book, Angel Armor, Just a Boy. And it's pretty fucking bad, but also pretty damn impressive for a 14-year-old. Again, I must reiterate that this whole novel, or perhaps novella is a better term, I guess, since its link fits that a bit more, was written by a nerdy teenager. And honestly, as weird as it is, and as badly handled as some character arcs and plot threads are on an objective level, it's also a finished book, which is something that nearly no one can claim to have finished at that age. And what's more is over the next couple of years, he would go on to write 3 more of these, all while he was in high school, going into his first years of college. So while many online might be quick to shit all over this book, and I think I have, to be fair, done a fair bit of that throughout this video, I would actually like to end this on a positive note, that I overall find it very impressive that this thing was finished at all, and for what it's worth, certainly is far from the worst thing I've ever read. The writing is rather repetitive, but grammar-wise is actually fairly alright, with the occasional mistake here or there. And while it is kind of cringy, I did overall enjoy the tale of Linkara, and at times almost felt the story was a little endearing, as it's so clear so much of the book both reflects the passions Lewis had at the time, but also his thoughts on the world, religion, people, and I find is an interesting showcase into his mind and where it was at that age, which will be extra fascinating to note back on as we progress through Linkara's story, not just that of the books, mind you, but his life story, and how he has changed as a man, and in some ways stayed the same over time. As I have noted many times before, I am also a huge fan of works that are just unapologetically the person's feelings and deepest thoughts, For many, this may come as very cringy, and being fair, it sort of is in a way, but it's an endearing sort that I wish I saw more often. These are true gems of the internet, when you get to read or watch or witness someone just be perfectly themselves and create a piece of art that isn't afraid to showcase who they are. No restrictions, no holding back. They are cringe, but they are also free. So while it may be kind of a shitty book, I applaud the courage it took to write it. Especially because Lewis probably had his parents read it as well at that age. That must have been very awkward. I wonder what their thoughts on the cat girl getting raped for a whole chapter was. I suppose we'll never know. But with all that being said, I noticed that in nearly every place I saw anyone reference these books, every time they seem to talk about something that happened in them, plot-wise, cringe-wise, or, well, just anything to do with them, everything that they noted that happened happens in this first book. Meaning, unless the same things repeat over and over again in the other 3 books, I don't think nearly anyone has taken the time to actually read the other 3 novels. And thus, I don't know what we're getting into with these 3, at all. Do they get better? Do they get worse? Are they even more crazy? Well, I think it's about time someone read them so you don't have to. Not that you were going to anyway. But nonetheless, with that in mind, let's journey through the other novels together, shall we? And that is it, ladies and gentlemen, for part 1 of the Linkara retrospective and this next part of the greater That Guy with the Glasses or Channel Awesome retrospective. I know this one just covered the first book, and many of you might have been expecting me to talk more about his videos and stuff, but that will come soon, very soon. But I do want to cover his other 3 books in the next part, where we'll probably be a little bit more brief of them than we were with this one. And then there'll be another part where I cover the Lightbringer comic and all his other related webcomic shenanigans and drama, before then finally getting to the part where we talk about his videos and, his comic retrospectives and reviews and his Power Rangers stuff, and any collaborations he's had, especially those involving Spoonie. You can expect the next part of this Linkara retrospective to come out sometime very soon. And of course, I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about the Linkara, first book and everything involved in it. Again, I really wanted to make this because I hadn't really seen a lot of coverage of these books, and I'm extremely excited to cover the next 3 because I see that those are covered even less amongst people. So those are very hidden Linkara lore, as it were. I also, of course, want to take this opportunity to thank all of my loyal patrons and channel members for continuing to support this channel and creative projects like these that take forever to make, including all of my night eggs and my night owlets, as well as a very special thank you to all of my great night owls, including Huge Meat Man, Hexmaniac Hannah, Icy Dice, Ho Hot, and Medusa's Hex, as well as a very special thank you to all of my arch owls, including the wise Nicodemus, the talented Cherry and GT, the Chi Vibes Zane Garden Party, the late night vibes Zane Donley, Had, aka I think Snickety said it best when he said there's so much purple in here I feel like I'm in a Dylan the Night Owl video, the Super Saiyan Star Punch Gaming, the Fearless Forgotten Ace, and the other Super Saiyan Sword. Thank you all for your continued support, and thank all of you who watched through this video and continue to like, comment, and be awesome people. But until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.